I think it's close enough to 12:30 that we can get started. No, not yet? Okay, Gil wants to wait. Let's all wait for Gil, everybody. Now we're ready to go, he says. All right. So just a reminder before we get started. Like we said earlier, this is going to be a slightly different presentation in that afterwards we're going to take cab questions as usual. We'll go around the table as many times as it takes. Please try to be respectful of your fellow members and limit yourself to just those 2 questions before we move on, and I promise we'll come back. Afterwards, once we're done with the cab questions, we will absolutely be taking questions from the audience. I do not have a separate sign-up sheet for that. I don't think that we need one. I'm just going to ask that you line up behind the microphone and ask your questions. Please remember, and I'm going to remind you again, that this is an opportunity for public questions. We will have a separate public comment period later on. So if you have an opinion you want to express, please save it for the public comment period. If you have a question to help you understand the presentation, after this presentation will be the time to do that question, okay? So with that, Mr. Sinderling, are you ready? Let's get him to come up here. Folks, this is Mark Sinderling. Like we said, he's from DOE HQ, and he will be presenting on the high-level waste definition interpretation.
Okay, so am I on? Can people hear me? Cool. Okay, thank you for giving me this time to be here. I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Waste and Materials Management. That's EM 4.2. I work for Betsy Connell, who works for Ike, and for Todd Schrader. So my 4 offices that I'm responsible for are the National Troop Program. That came out. That was a spin-off from the WIP incidents in 2014. Betsy Fornash heads that up. Doug Tonke heads our waste disposal office. That's low-level waste, that's mixed waste, that's depleted uranium, that's mercury. He's got a really big scope. My 3rd office is Steve Schneider, who does nuclear materials. He's working on 2 major projects that impact Savannah River, H Canyon IPT. He's leading that, as well as German Spheres project. If you've heard of that, I'm sure you have. And the 4th office is packaging and transportation. That's Joanne Lawrence. So 4 offices, but if you were to summarize what my office does, it's really 2 buckets. The first bucket is for waste that has a disposition path to keep it moving. Okay, so there are glitches in the system that happen every day. We just had one, I'm sure you probably heard. July 4th week, Y12 had an incident. They shipped waste to Nevada that they're currently doing fact-finding on. So basically, everything in Nevada slows down. They suspended shipments from Pantex and Y12 as a result of that. So from a programmatic policy perspective, we get involved in getting that waste moving again. The second major bucket is waste that doesn't have a disposition path. Okay, some think that that's the fun stuff. Some people think that that's the miserable stuff. For me, it varies from day to day. So, but two major buckets: keep the waste moving and to establish a disposition path to get it moving. All right, so a couple things. I've been working waste management policy for a long time. Policy in general is very hard. Radioactive waste management is really hard. And this was a heavy lift. Okay, so every opportunity in public, I'd like to commend the administration for taking this on, because there's 1,000 reasons always to say no. When there's something, you're going to receive feedback, people aren't going to like it, but they decided this is the right thing to do. So I applaud the secretary on down for taking this on. This is a great, in my opinion, a great achievement that they have accomplished. The second major thing here is, by way of introduction, I will frustrate you, or probably some or most of you, because a lot of folks want to get to the end game. They want to read the last chapter in the book. Okay, so we're just in the initial part of writing this novel. Okay, so people want to know, what's the impact on my site? People want to know, what's the impact on tank X? They want to know, what's the deal with waste stream Y? How can this benefit us? We're not there. And, I'm not going to go into hypotheticals. So if you've got a hypothetical, you know the answer ahead of time. I'm telling you that I'm not going to go into hypotheticals. Right now, we're focused on where we are today. I can give you the history of how we got here. I can say what the current job that we have to do, but I cannot speculate on any waste streams at any site. So looking at this slide, this is a major takeaway. Arrows exiting states. Right there is a major, major takeaway. Okay, so those of you who are familiar, I apologize. This is probably a sophisticated audience, but I just want to make sure that you all understand what we're dealing with. When we're dealing with reprocessing of spent fuel, there are two major products, right? There's the key isotopes, let me see if this works, which is uranium and plutonium, right? And the other thing is the waste streams that you get out of it. And that's really what we're talking about here is the reprocessing waste. So reprocessing of spent fuel, and this is a cartoon, you'll see this on the website, uranium, plutonium, is the valuable materials, and then you have these 53 million gallons at Hanford and 35 at Savannah River. Okay, so here's the history, brief history. October 10th was the proposed high-level waste interpretation. We spent 5 months considering public comment. Senior leadership in DOE was very interested in the comments we received, the process we used in responding to comments, and obviously the outcome, the impacts, et cetera. June 10th is when we issued the high-level waste interpretation. Unfortunately, the bold didn't show up in this one, but this is basically, and some reprocessing waste can be classified as non-high-level waste based on the radiological characteristics of the waste. Now, I'll get into some of the history. Most of you probably know that historically, DOE has interpreted the definition of high-level waste mostly by source. What we're saying here is no, there are some key phrases in the definition that we want to focus on. June 10th, in parallel, I'm sure you've heard, same day, we notified the public of our intent to prepare NEPA on a single Savannah River waste stream. And we'll get to more of that in a little bit. Okay, so wrong one. Okay, so the primary takeaways, safe and appropriate path forward to remove reprocessing waste. Again, arrows leaving states. That is our goal. DOE's interpretation does not change or revise any current policies, requirements, or agreements. This was a major question that we got in the public comments. How does this impact current agreements? We're not touching any of those. All we're doing is interpreting the words right now. And we're through that process. We've spent 5 months carefully evaluating the public comment. Third point, decisions on how this interpretation will apply existing will be the subject of subsequent actions. Okay, so for Savannah River, it's NEPA. And, well, for virtually all the waste streams that could be contemplated for reprocessing waste, you'd have to do NEPA. But as far as some sites have RCRA and CERCLA commitments that need to be honored as well. Those too are public processes similar to NEPA. Fourth bullet, working closely with officials, regulators, stakeholders, et cetera. Okay, so we are responding, as requests come in, like this one. Some are face-to-face, some are WebEx. We just did WebEx with ECA and ECOS. A lot of visits to the Hill, a lot of people interested in this. HASC, SASC, the whole alphabet soup of the Hill, huge suit. All of them are interested in what we're doing because there's a lot of press on it. There was a lot of press. It's simmered down a little bit. But we still have a lot of interest, and we can get into some of that, I'm sure, a little later with what's going on the Hill. Fifth bullet? Okay, so bottom line on NRC, another comment that we got was, okay, so what's the impact on NRC? What's about their role? There's no change in NRC's role whatsoever. So there are two major pieces of what they do. Number one, it's not on here, and I need to rewrite this bullet. By the way, I apologize. You'll see here, this is we took all your slides. We'll get another copy to you. This is not attorney-client privilege. Down here it says that was a mistake of mine in my haste to get Phil Clark the information. I did not remove that. So I will strike that when I get back to the office and send you a draft so that you can comfortably look at this. So NRC, basically two areas where they're involved. Number one is establishing the regulation for low-level waste disposal. That's 10 CFR 61. Okay, so they're responsible for that, maintaining that. They also delegate authority through the agreement state process. For example, Utah and Texas are agreement states, so that the state really is the regulator of any low-level waste facility in that state. That's kind of their role. Nothing's changing with that. We'll go through the normal process that NRC and the agreement states have set up. The second area is really not applicable here, but the normal 3116 process, which is on-site only, remember, and the 435 process, NRC will maintain their current role of consultation. Nothing has changed with NRC. Last one. This only applies to, or this does not apply to West Valley. Okay, so you look at the October 10th FRN, there were 4 reprocessing sites. We included the 3 defense ones as well as the commercial. As a result of public comment and consideration process, they reminded us, rightly, that high-level waste has its own definition in the West Valley Act. So, and that's one issue. The other issue is that NRC has a very special involvement because it's a commercial, it was a licensed facility. So we're taking a very complex topic, this high-level waste interpretation, and then to add those other elements of a different definition of an additional NRC involvement beyond what I just spoke about, we figured, let's keep it simple. Let's focus on the defense reprocessing sites and take West Valley off the table, and that's what we did. Okay, so why are we doing this? This is the benefits. It's the right thing to do environmentally and enhances worker safety at DOE sites. It's all about moving waste out of the state as soon as possible. Uses proven technology to treat and accelerates the cleanup. Second bullet, could provide DOE with disposal paths for waste streams at Savannah River, Hanford, in Idaho. Again, that's your major reprocessing sites, and the goal is the arrows leaving the state. Third major bullet, utilizes mature and available commercial facilities. These are facilities that exist today. We don't have to build anything, and they want our waste. So let's get them the waste. And one point here, so the challenge is, this is a dance, right? Any waste management disposition is a dance. It takes 2 to tango. You have a waste generator with waste, and you have a waste receiver, a disposal site. There needs to be a match. If there's no match, no waste is going anywhere. So, a lot of people are projecting what this could mean. If there's no match, waste isn't moving anywhere. Fourth bullet, aligns with international guidelines. No one in the world interprets high-level waste in accordance with its source. So we are joining the international community in interpreting high-level waste in accordance with its radiological characteristics. The last bullet, I love to focus on this point. What we are doing for reprocessing waste is exactly what we've been doing for non-reprocessing waste successfully for decades. If you have D&D work, environmental restoration at the sites, you sample, you characterize, you package, you treat if necessary, and you ship. Again, it's a dance. Waste, matching the waste disposal site. If there's a match and everyone agrees, and that's stakeholders, that's the public, that's the regulator, everyone agrees, then we have a successful disposal path. But the point here is that we've been doing this for decades, and all we're doing is using that methodology, that process for the reprocessing piece of this, which is special because it came from spent fuel. What we're saying is, in waste characteristics, waste process, it's not special, it's the same. Okay, so this is what we're all about. I think some folks are concerned. As a matter of record, they focus on 3 words. There it is. From the reprocessing. That's the source-based definition. What we're saying is, not so fast. There are a couple of key phrases that the Congress has put in the definition: highly radioactive and sufficient concentrations. So they are not defined in AEA or NWPA, and for good reason, right? The Congress aren't technical experts here. They're relying on those responsible for exercising AEA authority for us, and that is the DOE. So the other thing I would highlight here is, and I'd encourage you all to read, it's 12 and a half pages of, your FRN, your 3 columns of 8 font words, but you can get through it in 15 minutes or so. One of the points we raise is commission. You see Part B. We're not talking about Part B, but I include it because it specifically references the commission. The commission isn't in Part A. So it's an argument from silence, but I think it's a very good argument that the department has the authority to interpret the definition of high-level waste, which we have done. Okay, so this is really the crux. It was the crux of the issue on October 10th, and it's the crux on June 10th. This is the methodology, the 2 paragraphs which we wanted people to focus on, because this is the methodology we determine whether a waste stream remains high-level waste, and some will remain high-level waste if it's highly radioactive and it has sufficient concentrations, or if it's non-high-level waste. So the first one, so the red bold are the changes that we made in response to the comments, but let me get that in a couple of minutes. I want to explain what this methodology really does. Part 1 is very simple. Basically, the NRC in 10 CFR 61 in table 6155, they identify the classes, Class A being the lowest level, Class B being the medium, and Class C being the highest. What Part 1 of this definition says is part of this methodology, if we meet Class A, B, or C, by definition, it's low-level waste, right? That's not rocket science, very easy to understand. Okay, so the second part is a little more difficult, and this is written by lawyers, so I consider it kind of backwards in the way that it's worded, but let me explain it in layman's word for a simple mind. So what we're saying is if you have a waste stream that is above Class C, above what's in 6155 tables, if you provide evidence that you can safely dispose of it in a near or intermediate facility, it doesn't need geologic disposal. You have provided evidence that it can be safely disposed. So therefore, doesn't require geologic disposal, so therefore, it's low-level waste. It's all about safety if you can demonstrate, and the way we do this is through a performance assessment. Okay, so there's a hierarchy. To the waste management people in DOE, this is, and I apologize, this is kind of what we do every day, but I understand some people don't get the overall hierarchy. But basically you have performance objectives that ultimately determine the release rates that are allowable to be safe. Under the performance objectives, you conduct a performance assessment. That is where you conduct modeling and analysis to show that the performance objectives are met. In other words, that it's safe. Below that, you have a waste acceptance criteria that a site would develop, which is basically the technical criteria on what the limits of the requirements on the waste to meet the performance assessment and ultimately the performance objective. And then the last row in the hierarchy is everything else. You have sampling plans, you have characterization requirements, you have packaging and transportation, et cetera. So it's basically I consider it a 4-tier hierarchy on how we dispose of waste and how we safely dispose of waste and how we determine whether a specific waste stream can get from the waste generator to the disposal site. Again, that match needs to occur. If there's a glitch on any one of those, stop. It's not going to that disposal site. You need to find another disposition path. So the red bold, and meets the performance objectives. Basically, NRC and others raise the fact that, look, 6155, those are the actual Class C, Class B, Class A, B, and C requirements, but you also need to, that allows you to meet the performance objectives. Go ahead and put that in. So we went ahead and put that in. This was kind of a typo. There are no regulatory requirements for performance assessment, so people called us out on that, and we appreciate that. So we struck that. That was absolutely correct to remove that. So again, bottom line here is waste meeting either of these tests could be classified based on radiological content and disposed of in accordance with the WAC, which is what we want to do. Okay, so here are some key facts. You know, and this responds to a lot of, we were on radio silence for 5 months between October 10th and June 10th. You know, there was a lot of information passed around there, and this is what kind of our, summary response to that. This is what the high-level waste interpretation will do. Allows for disposal of reprocessing waste, again, from the states where it resides today. Reduce the risk to public workers and environment. Again, if you are emptying tanks, you are precluding future issues with that tank. A lot of these tanks are beyond design life. So the earlier, the better. The lower the risk. Accelerate waste removal, that's what I was saying. So the second thing, high-level waste interpretation allows waste to be safely disposed of based on physical characteristics. It's sound science and judgment. Underpinning all of this is detailed analysis. Again, performance assessment, what is the waste, you sample it, you characterize it, where can it be safely disposed of to get that match. Third point is careful and considered and deliberate process. 5 months of looking at public comment. We received over 5,000 comments, 360 were unique and detailed and, in my opinion, very helpful for us. Going through that whole process of consideration of public comment. This is not required. When you do an interpretation, the department's not required to do public comment, but we went ahead, the leadership was very interested in what the public had to say, so we went ahead and did that. Point 4, we will continue to ensure that waste is managed and disposed of safely, working with stakeholders. And that's, again, it's through the regulatory process, it's through forums such as this, again, just responding to anyone who's asking any question with respect to the high-level waste interpretation. And the last point is NEPA. None of this reprocessing waste has NEPA on it except for Yucca Mountain. That's for geologic repositories. So, public's going to be involved for any reprocessing waste. Again, we're focusing on one single waste stream at Savannah River. 6, it's in accordance with all technical and regulatory standards. Okay, so again, people say, they want to jump to the end, and I'm saying, no hypotheticals. They say, well, what's the process? Well, the process is hidden in plain sight. The current regulatory process that you see for commercial disposition is what we're using. If the NRC is involved in that, then they'll be involved. If it's a state agreement, they'll be involved, and the state will be involved. In their normal RCRA, CERCLA, whatever the process is currently in place for disposition of a non-reprocessing waste, it will be the same identical process for this material. 7, the goal is remove reprocessing waste from tanks. I've already said that multiple times, right? 8, support for the approach for independent organizations. Okay, so you go on the website and you can see there's a fact sheet on 23 independent non-DOE reports that are all arguing for the same thing, that you need to look at risk approach, and it's GAO, it's BRC, it's Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Okay, so the Undersecretary loves to use the Blue Ribbon Commission because one of the issues that one of the comments over and over, this is a Trump administration idea to cut costs. Well, actually, no, that's not correct. Most of what EM does is bipartisan, right? And specifically here, this was we're talking Blue Ribbon Commission, who was Ernie Moniz, and prior to that, he also provided a report in 2011 from MIT, which Monica Realpuzzo, former Assistant Secretary, was also a part of. So the point here, not about politics, this is about doing the right thing. He called for it in 2011. He called for it again in 2012 and 13. The point here, and there's others. There's GAO, there's NRC, the the other NRC, National Research Council. And you can go on the website and look at these different reports of people saying, DOE, look at this, DOE, look at this, DOE, look at this. We've looked at it. So 9, time to align with IAEA international standards. Basically, the bottom line here, it's time to join our peers. 10, DOE responsibilities will not change. We'll ensure that the nation's radioactive waste is safely treated, stored, and disposed. What we've been doing safely for non-reprocessing waste, it is our desire, it is our intention to do for reprocessing waste. Okay, so where we are. Next steps. We've got 10,000 gallons of material from DWPF, and the point here is we're trying to achieve 2 things. Number one, in waste management, you're always trying to keep as many balls in the air as possible, because ultimately, inevitably, you'll either drop one or someone will steal it from you, right? So your options, it's tools in the toolbox. You're trying to maximize the options for all your waste. The latest example is Y12. For Pantex and for Y12, NNSS is off the table right now. They're suspended. So we're always looking for optionality in waste management. There's not a lot of radioactive options for disposal, so we want to maximize that. The second thing is in fiscal year 23, that off stream, the wastewater from DWPF basically is being diverted from the tank farms. So, and you can look this up, it's in System Plan 21. So right now, the ultimate disposition of that material is TBD. So when I was soliciting some ideas for a high-level waste, currently high-level waste stream to be used for this, I asked Jim, and he went off and he came up with a brilliant waste stream, which was a DWPF wastewater. Because it kind of meets all of the criteria that, okay, so we want to start out slow. These are baby steps. Where do we start? Seems logical. This waste stream doesn't have a defined path. We hope it's low enough in activity. We want to start easy, start with the low-hanging fruit. So that's kind of the path that we're on. It's a single waste stream at Savannah River. We're not doing anything anywhere else. And the first step in that process is an environmental assessment. And I know you're all going to think, okay, so how long is that going to take? So I'm not going to tell you how long it's going to take, because I don't know how long it's going to take. All I do know is the process, and that is an EA, an environmental assessment, results in one of 2 things. Number one, an EIS, where you need to have more information, you need to do more analysis, or a FONSI, a finding of no significant impact. That would be your decision document. So that is the path that we're on today, is conduct an EA, do the analysis, and end up with either a path for an EIS or a FONSI. And, unfortunately, I don't have a schedule for that. We are working, all I can say is from my perspective, as soon as possible, but I don't know how long that is. We are working diligently with Jim's team on moving forward with that, for that DWPF waste stream. So that's pretty much my spiel. Again, I can't talk details on where we're going at any specific site, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
All right, folks. Narendra, you got your card up first. Let's start with you, sir.
Narendra Malakab, thank you very much for the presentation. Please forgive my ignorance. I'm going to ask a couple of questions. When I was reading the document which James has sent us to read it, in one paragraph it says if it doesn't have a fissile material, it could be classified as non-nuclear material, non-nuclear, high-level waste. But when we're looking at the SRS presentations made yesterday by Mike about the use of material in the H Canyon, and when it goes to the tank farm, it has some fissile material. And this morning we listened to Maxine about the K reactor, the storage of plutonium, and I asked if those materials have fissile material, and answer was yes, but at the same time it is not um, nuclear material. I forgot the term to use it, but so how you could define that if you remove the fissile material, then it becomes non-high-level waste, and the material which is already stored in the K area, it has fissile material and it's already that category. So
Okay, so I think to answer your question, let's see if this thing works. Maybe I went too far. Hold on. Okay, so bottom line is, regardless, okay, so again, we're starting with one single waste stream, but if you want to do a hypothetical in your own mind, these are the two criteria you'd have to meet. If you meet either the first criterion or the second, then it would be non-high-level waste. If it doesn't meet one or two, then it remains high-level waste, and it would have its normal disposition path, which is currently a geologic repository, a Yucca Mountain or a Yucca Mountain follow-on, whatever you choose to think about.
my second question is, let's assume that all waste at SRS is not a high-level waste, and my concern is it will never leave the site. The reason I'm giving you, the failed equipment, like melter number 1 and 2 from DWPF, they're still sitting at the site and there is no plan to ship it out. So my concern is they will always stay here. Hey, it's not a high-level waste, it can stay here.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I can't talk to, that's really Office of Nuclear Energy issue, and look, they've been, putting the licensing in the budget for Yucca Mountain for a couple of years, and it's never been successful. So that is the path, and you're right. I don't know if you go so far as to call it an orphan waste, but there's no near-term solution for vitrified waste currently. I agree. Anything that was scheduled to go to Yucca Mountain, right now it's really TBD. So I agree that that right now it is a waste without a firm path to disposal.
Whereas we can dispose of RECRA waste as mixed waste and send it off-site for disposal.
Assuming that you have a disposal site that will take that material and meets the waste acceptance requirements, yes.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Sure. You were next.
Dave Vivakis, CAB. Thank you very much for the informative presentation. You cited MIT and the Blue Ribbon Commission, excuse me, and you talked about that this is doing the right thing, but at some point you always get into a discussion of dollars, a cost-benefit analysis. Is there any short-term or long-term savings associated with this, what you're recommending?
Okay, so again, we can't talk details because no decisions have been made, but in general, I will say that cold processing is obviously cheaper than hot processing, right? So, a melter is going to be more expensive than grout. But that's it's the only thing that I would say, and it's a matter of record. Again, no decisions have been made. I'm not talking about any specific waste stream, but in general, you can make general assessments that, if you're talking about vitrification is always it's an extremely complex process, as you know, from DWPF, versus, just grouting. I like to say that I've grouted in my driveway, but I've not created molten glass in my driveway. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Doug Howard, CAP. Thank you for coming and giving us this presentation. The first question I have is, why has it taken so long to get to this?
Okay, so I can't speak to that. I can't speak to that. I'm just glad, like I said, I'm glad that it's out and about. So that's all I have to say on that one.
Okay.
But I share your sentiment.
Yeah. The last question I have, would there be or is there any kind of political or military advantage to doing this?
I don't know. I mean, I don't see any military thing, and politically, look, I can't speak to that either. I'm not a politician, so I won't go there either. I apologize.
Thank you.
Sure.
Let's swing back around. Dave Isley.
Dave Isley, CAP. So thank you so much for answering a lot of questions for me. This is really so rational, and I'm like Doug. This should have been taken on decades ago. Kind of in a general term, and I'm not talking individuals, but what types of organizations or entities out there would object to this or are objecting to it, and why? And you can keep that general, don't point it
Right.
out.
Okay, so I think that in general, folks are concerned about leaving waste on site. It's not what we're doing. Again, oops, wrong way. Sorry.
I'm sorry, people are concerned about waste.
Leaving waste on site. There's your answer. It's going off site. They're concerned that this will result in waste being left on site. I think that that's one of the major concerns. And I think the second thing I would say is just distrust in the Department of Energy. I think at Savannah River, we enjoy a very good relationship with the regulator. And as a result of that, I think a lot of progress has been made. But I wouldn't say that for every single site. So there's a lot. I think there's a lot of built-in distrust that has occurred, and we're working to fix that. To build, again, baby steps. This is not decide, announce, defend. And that, people are frustrated with that. You're damned if you do, damned if you don't. So, we're going in a methodical baby step approach here so people can look at what we're doing, gain confidence, and hopefully build up some rapport so that people trust us to, as to what we're doing. But those are the two things I would say.
But I'm not sure I understand that, because if you meet the requirements that you pointed out there, like we have a burial ground and we bury stuff, if it meets those requirements, so what?
I just think there's concern that, we're doing something nefarious.
Okay.
And, we're not. I mean, we're trying to be as transparent, open with this whole process as possible. And I just think that there is, there might be some distrust out there.
Like it's a trick.
Yeah. Basically,
okay.
I mean, I
thank
think
you.
that I can't speak for them. All I can say is, what I've read from some of the comments, that there's a lot of distrust in what we're trying to achieve.
Tom French, the cab. As anyone will tell you, I'm very good at simple-minded questions, so I have one for you. You're talking about the 10,000 gallons of recirc water as our first experiment. And is the plan to convert that to a grout product that could be then shipped to one of the disposal sites?
Correct.
Okay.
Right, and there's different options that we're looking at. The first option is to do that solidification, that treatment on site. Another option is to do it at the disposal facility. Another option is to send it to a treatment facility and then send it for disposal. But the option all those options are grout.
Okay, thank you.
Smith, Cap. Thank you for the presentation. Although it was a little confusing, but I did get a lot out of it. But, at the end of the day, if we do reclassify some of this waste, and there is a safe way to dispose of it, and I know it's probably going to go counter to a lot of people's thoughts in this room, but if it can stay on this site and not have to be moved, you're talking about basically 3 states out of 50. So, it's going to have to go somewhere, one way or the other. So if it stays here, we're going to be dissatisfied. If it has to go to Yucca Mountain or wherever, they're going to be dissatisfied. So you're never going to please everyone. So to me, it would come back to what is the safest and the most economical way of handling it, and the least amount of shipping and carriage of this, to me, would be the lowest cost.
Okay, so I would agree except for one thing, and that is, again, you need to have a match between the waste and the disposal site. Because if you meet all of what you said and you don't have that match, the waste isn't moving.
Well,
So-
to me, that goes without saying, though, that goes to the definition of safest, in my opinion. If the site is not the most compatible and the most correct place to put it, then that decision has to be made in favor of the best location.
Agree.
for it.
If you have a disposal path, a potential disposal path, there's no reason in my mind why you wouldn't do it. I completely agree. One issue, though, I like to correct this because I don't like proliferation of incorrect. We're not reclassifying anything, okay? So, and we're not reinterpreting anything. We are interpreting the definition, and technically, when you look at 435 and how we do waste management, we don't classify any waste until we're ready to disposition it. For example, the reprocessing waste, we manage it as high-level waste today. We have not classified anything until we're ready to dispose of it. Just one clarification for that.
Yeah, one thing I think to help with Bob's comment there is Mark started to describe the performance assessment. And the key part of that is it's unique to every individual disposal facility. So, for instance, if you have a water table that's 20 feet below the surface or 1,000 feet below the surface, right, grossly different in performance assessment. So it's not any waste in any facility has the same effect. And that's the key part of that interpretation is understanding that receiver site, what are its conditions for acceptance of that waste, and is it a match? So I think that's a key difference in what you're thinking. And while I got the floor, just maybe help clarifying one of Narendra's comments. When he referred to Mike's presentation yesterday, Mike was talking about dissolving plutonium material and disposing of it. So it would have been material that was product material, never would have been part of the
Got it.
high-level waste. So
Right.
to help match those up, it would have never been part of the high-level waste
Right.
discussion. And then the last comment I had, and I think, Dave, you mentioned about cost-benefit analysis. If you remember the loop I discussed yesterday with that recycle stream, it's really not totally a cost-benefit. I don't have an answer when we get to that point of what to do with it. So again, cost benefit may not even be part of that equation. It's how do I cut that do loop off and be able to have an answer for me 10 years down the road. So that's the benefit that I'm really looking for out of the recycle analysis.
Thank you, Jim. Great comments.
Thanks, Jim. AK.
A.K. Hassan Cab. In dealing with characteristics of the radioactivity versus the source, what kind of advantages do you think that it gives in terms of a lot of the storage activity that we have now? We're talking about 50-year life, which means that at some point it has to be revisited, et cetera. And if we classify based on characteristics, in the future we will know specifically what a batch contains based on characteristics and its sufficient concentrations, et cetera. So we will know how to approach it as more clearly, it seems, than we do today. Additionally, we would know more about surveillance for it because of its potential hazard for terrorists or whatever, and maintaining it as we pursue a disposition path. So I'm just thinking, what advantages do you see based on some of those things that I mentioned by going forward with the new description?
I mean, I think, again, I would go back to the, let's see here, the benefit slide. Here it is. It's the right thing to do. Accelerates is what you're talking about. It provides disposal paths. Another benefit is, these are existing facilities. We're not building anything. We're not doing anything new. And there's your tax liability, financial liability. I mean, it's in there. It's certainly a piece of it, but it's not the major component, and aligns with international guidelines. And again, it's consistent with how we're doing things elsewhere for other wastes. So I think it's all about, again, moving waste. Our mission, EM's mission, will not be complete until all of the waste finds its final home. So any additional tools or optionality that we can provide to achieve that sooner is what we're trying to do.
Mark, I really appreciate you coming down. Thank you very much for this. It's something that we've been talking about for months, if not years. So thank you. It's great to hear it directly from you. I have a question on your key fact number 5.
Okay.
Can we go to that?
Oh, wait a minute. Yep.
So, determinations will be made by case and with the appropriate any NEPA analysis before any designation or disposal decision with a focus. Who do you foresee being the people making that decision assuming NEPA gets approved through NEPA?
Okay, so the process is well defined. Again, the department does the NEPA analysis and it ultimately makes the decision. For an EA, it would be either an EIS or a FONSI, and for an EIS, if you go that route, it's a record of decision. So that a FONSI is the decision for an EA, and a ROD, a record of decision, is the decision, the documented decision for the EIS. So both of those are made by DOE.
So so on a case-by-case issue, we'd have to go through that entire
Correct.
process.
Now, and again, the public is involved in providing
yeah.
comments as you go through that process. But yes, the department owns those decisions.
Wow. Okay. That's a process.
Yep.
And then a follow-up on Tom's question, you mentioned that it could possibly go to a treatment facility. Do we have any idea what treatment facility that would be?
There are different ones out there. Energy Solutions has one. Permafix has one. There are multiple. They're publicly available. You can Google it, what treatment facilities for radioactive waste. But those are two that jump into my mind.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
AK, did you have any more follow-up? Okay. I'm going to ask once, maybe 2 more times. Is there any more questions from around the table? Gil? No. Okay. Anything else? Okay. You want to say something first?
Before we go to the public comments. This is we're very excited that Mark's here. We're very happy that he came. We're very happy that we have this opportunity. At this time, we are going to take questions from the public. This is unusual. It's a somewhat, I hate using adjectives with the word unique, but it is somewhat unique in the fact that we don't do this on any normal situation. This is something that's been requested from Washington, and we can do it, but in the future, this is not something we will be able to do except on a largely exception process that will be made. A decision will be made in Washington on this. So this is not a regular process to have the citizenry actually ask questions directly at a CAB meeting, but we are going to do it today. So I just want to put that on the record for if this comes up in 10 years and somebody says, I want to ask questions, it's out there. This is not normal. It's an exception. Thank you.
Stole my line. So with that, I'm going to ask, like we said, there's no special sign up for questions from the public for Mark. If you do have one, I'm going to ask you to line up at the microphone at this time. Oh, good. Thanks, Rick. It was going to be real awkward for all of us if nobody had any questions after all that lead up.
That's
Go ahead,
what I
Rick.
figured. So I wanted Mark to get his money's worth as well. So I'm Rick McLeod with SRS Community Reuse Organization. We have been following this subject since 2013. And for y'all that like to read, also Energy Community Alliance. Mark didn't mention them in the slide, but they have put out a number of documents as well on this subject. So I highly suggest you read those as well, and I'm curious on the list and Mark's comments. So it's going to be kind of hard, Mark, to actually ask a question that you can answer. So I'm going to try to piggyback on Gil's comments, because if you go to your last slide about the NEPA process, because this is the first time I've heard, I understand it goes to the FONSI or it goes to EIS. But this being such a controversial issue, will the FONSI be enough, or do you have to go to a ROD even after the FONSI to show a record of decision? Are you saying the FONSI is enough to move this forward?
Okay, so all that's defined in the NEPA process. The FONSI is the decision, unless we decided to do that EIS would be required, then a ROD would be needed. But for an EA, FONSI is the decision.
So sorry to jump ahead. I'm one of those. Read that last chapter
well,
first, but,
this is the process. We're following it.
And so the CAB will be following the process very closely. Suggest y'all do. Hopefully it'll start soon and we can get in some of the EA analysis and start following that. The ultimate goal that we hope would be to get to some glass logs, the solidified glass logs. Some of those are actually by chemical composition no longer high-level waste. So there is a path. This is a baby step and a great baby step. So sorry I'm getting into comments. I'm sorry. So anyway. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. And I'll have comments during the comment section on this one.
Thanks, Rick.
Any other questions from the public? Last call from questions around the table. Mark, thank you for coming down. We definitely appreciate it. Thank you, sir. All right, we're doing great on time. Let's say let's keep it that way. Let's go into our next presentation. Craig Armstrong is going to talk about the contracting process. If you remember, we talked about a little bit about how this came out of a presentation last year. A couple board members expressed that they weren't sure about how the process went. Craig's going to explain it to us.
Middle button. Good afternoon. I'm Craig Armstrong. I'm the Director of Acquisition Management for DOE at Savannah Riverside. As such, I am also in short, the Procurement Director in charge of all contracts for EM. And federal contracting is a very broad area. And so hopefully I'm going to provide you with some information today that is useful to you. And I do appreciate the opportunity to do this. Down to the basics, the United States government does have the ability and authority to issue contracts and to enter into contracts with private entities. And it all comes from a case in 1830 that determined that, yes, the United States government can issue contracts and enter into contracts with private firms. And here's our authority. And contracting authority is very, very important. The Secretary of Energy is the head authority for DOE, for contracting. And in DOE, he has delegated that authority to the Deputy Secretary, who further delegates it to the senior procurement executives for DOE and NNSA, and they have their own separate procurement authority in each of those organizations. And that's primarily due to the NNSA Act, which says that no one but an NNSA employee can control NNSA work. So basically at Savannah Riverside, we have two contracting officers, for example, for the SRS M&O contract, where we have NNSA work going on and we have EM going on. My office handles the EM contracting authority, and the NNSA contracting office handles the NNSA contracting authority. And then it goes from the senior procurement executives to their heads of contracting activity. And in EM, the head of contracting activity is currently Norb Doyle at EM headquarters. And then he further delegates that in warrants to contracting officers. And contracting officers have a personal warrant that's assigned to them personally, which gives them authority to sign their own personal name and obligate the United States government on a contract. It's a very, very revered authority and a very serious one. So as far as the contracting process, there are two basic processes, and one is the pre-award process, where we actually award contracts. And the second one is after we award the contract. For the very large contracts that we have separate contract administration activities. So the pre-award process in EM is done by the CBC, the Center for the Consolidated Business Center in Cincinnati. We work with them very closely and establish source evaluation boards with our technical folks on it and some of my folks on it to kind of look ahead for contract administration. And that process includes acquisition planning, and in acquisition planning, you're looking at, okay, what's the size of the contract? What type of contract do we want? Is it something that we can define well and do fixed price and ask the contractor to bid us a fixed price, and that's the price and we're paying? Or is it something that's more nebulous and where we have to have a cost reimbursement contract for best effort, if you will? And most of our large contracts are cost reimbursement. The one exception is the Amoresco contract that we have for power. That is actually a fixed price contract. And then, so in acquisition planning, you decide your strategy, how you're going to go about awarding the contract. And then you develop a request for proposal, and which you include all the evaluation factors for award. You include in section L of the proposal, you include the things that you need the contractor to provide you in their proposal, and then how you're going to evaluate that. And the secret to good contracting and the good pre-award process is, for the federal government, we have to do what we say we're going to do. We tell the contractors how we're going to evaluate it. We tell the contractors what to give us, and we must evaluate it exactly like we said in the RFP. And when we don't, we're subject to protest by a losing contractor and losing it, that kind of thing. So, and that's decided by GAO most of the time. So then when we issue the RFP, then industry, a lot of times we do a draft RFP and industry can give us questions, and they'll submit questions. Now, there's a rule that basically if a contractor submits us a question on a draft RFP, when we answer to everyone. So everybody gets to see their question, and everybody gets to see what the answer is. So it levels the playing field with regards to a clarification, if you will, of the RFP. Of course, we'll take the questions in consideration when developing the final RFP if we need to make any changes. And then, of course, when we get the proposals in, we have a long process of evaluating those proposals, and we literally go right down the evaluation factors for award. It's usually something like key personnel, management, the management approach, past performance, and cost. And we'll literally go right down there and evaluate each one of those. Typically, the technical and management, the people who are doing the evaluation for that, will not see the cost. That's being done by a separate organization, so that there's no ability to basically discriminate based on cost. If your technical is good, it needs to be rated good, regardless of what the cost says. And then later, the contracting officer and the source evaluation board and the source selection officer will consider costs and consider everything together in making their decision. So typically we like to award without discussion, but occasionally there comes a time when we must resolve any discrepancies in someone's proposal or resolve a flaw in the RFP, if you will. And so we must enter into discussions to do that. And when you enter into discussions with one contractor, you must enter into discussions with all of them. And you must identify, when you enter into discussions, you must identify all of their weaknesses and all of their weaknesses. You don't really go into their strengths at that point. But, and they get an opportunity to address those during the discussions, period. So if necessary, we'd go to discussions. And in the source selection authority decision, the source evaluation board will make will make a report. It's not a recommendation. Correct myself there. So we'll make a report on how they see the offers stacking up with the evaluation factors for award. And then the Source Selection Authority will make a decision independently and write a report of that decision on who they think should get the award. A lot of times, I advise source selection authorities occasionally, and a lot of times I tell them, I like to see if, when I'm writing that report, I like to see if, okay, I might have my mind made up who I want to award to. Let me see, can I award to somebody else? Let me make a case for that. And in making the case for that, I run into problems. And that helps me decide really who the real awardee should be and why that's justified. And then the contract is awarded. And of course, our large contracts always have to go up to headquarters, DOE, for senior procurement executive approval for the large contracts. I have $25 million in contracting authority. Anything over that, I've got to go to headquarters. EM has 50 million. Did I say 25,000? I meant 25 million. DOE EM has 50 million, and above that, it has to go to the senior procurement executive. So now we get to post-award. So after the contract's awarded, that's when my office takes the contract over, and we assign an administrative contracting officer. And these are the kinds of things that we take care of: the pre-performance conferences, contract transition activities, contract management plan development. Every contract has a contract management plan. We decide how we're going to manage that contract. The performance evaluation measurement plan, we have to develop that, and that is how we're going to judge the contractor's performance. And basically, it leads to how we're going to award fee based on that judgment and assessment of performance. And we also, of course, pay the contractor. That's a very important thing. Invoice and voucher reviews and payment authorizations. Fee administration, where we work with the award fee board if it's an award fee contract. We work with the federal project director if it's incentive fee. And we will basically make, in the end, we make contract modifications to award the fee in the contract. And change management, I'm going to get into changes in a little bit and tell you the different kinds of changes and how we go about that. We also do, you may have heard of CPARS. It's a Contract Performance Assessment Reporting System. And that is a government only system. It's a system that we share our report with the contractor for 60 days, and they can make a response to that. And then we can resolve their concerns or not. It depends on what the contracting officer's decision is. And then that goes into a system that is accessed by all federal agencies. So when it comes to, for example, the Federal Aviation Authority or Centers for Disease Control is looking to award a contract to one of our contractors, they can look in the CPARS and they can actually see how we rated them. And they can use that in their evaluations for past performance for awarding contracts. So needless to say, CPARS is pretty important to our contractors because it means either a good or bad report when it comes to looking for more work. And then the contract closeout process, which can be very lengthy. That involves auditing, cost reimbursement type contracts, and can take some time. So these are the contracting officer responsibilities. I've been a federal contracting officer since 1979. So it's a very important job, a responsible job. And these are the things that the FAR charges the contracting officer with. First of all, the contracting officer is the only government employee who can actually change or agree to a change to a contract term or condition. And the only one that can obligate government funds. So we also have to ensure performances of necessary actions for effective contracting. We have to ensure that taxpayers get value from the contracts we issue. We have to ensure that funds are available. This is a very, very important issue. We can't do anything without money. I tell my contracting officers, I have many contracting officers that work for me, and I tell them, especially the new ones who are just coming up, I say, listen, I can fix just about anything, any problem you have, any mistake you make, we can fix it. Except, you gotta have money. You know, can't fix that. You gotta have money first. So we have the CFO will actually certify funds for us to obligate. Until we get that certification, we really can't do much. So we have to ensure compliance by both parties, and that's a very interesting 3 words, by both parties. I've been in situations where I've had the government employees come to me, colonels in the Air Force come to me and say, you're supposed to be on our side, and you're ruling against us on this issue. I said, no, sir, I'm not supposed to be on your side. We have a congressional mandate to do what's fair and reasonable to both parties, for both parties. And so that's a very, very important principle that contracting officers live by. Sometimes the government makes mistakes, and we have to wade in there and negotiate with the contractor and make sure the contractor's treated fairly. After all, the contractor's taxpayers too. So, you know, we have to make sure everyone's treated fairly. And safeguarding the interests of the United States. Ensuring contractors receive impartial, fair, and equitable treatment. Again, we have to do what's fair and reasonable for both parties. And now, you may have heard of the contracting officer representatives. So we have technical employees who are representing the contracting officer to the contractor. This is what they can do. They really should know the technical aspects of the contract. They also are allowed to build rapport with the contractor. It's a good thing. And we enter into partnering initiatives all the time with our contractors. They can help the contractor interpret technical requirements. We have clauses in the contract called technical direction, and the contracting officer's representative can actually give technical direction if that's all it is, if it's within the scope of the contract. Every time I've seen every time they issue a contracting officer representative letter, there's usually a clause at the bottom of it saying, this is believed to be within the scope of the contract. If you disagree, you must see the contracting officer so that the contracting officer can work a change, equitable adjustment, whatever it takes. So they monitor and evaluate contractor performance, and this is very important when it comes to our fee administration and performance evaluation measurement plans. That plan will give the technical people basically a roadmap on how to assess the contractor. And recommend corrective actions on deficiencies. Many times they can ask for a corrective action plan and approve that. And inspect and accept deliverables. But a COR cannot change scope, price, terms, or conditions of the contract. Only the contracting officer can do that. Now we talk about contract modifications or changes to the contract. There's several kinds, and the contracting officer is able to change the contract within the general scope of the contract. It's like, you know, we can't do something that's totally outside the scope of that contract. We can't make those changes and include things that weren't in the contract in a general fashion when it was first awarded. And the reason we can't do that, and the FAR will not allow us to do that, is because that's prejudicial to other bidders who could have bid on that work that wasn't in the scope of the contract. And so we really have to go back out for competition in accordance with the Competition and Contracting Act and give those people opportunity to do that. So it's general scope of the contract is very important. And so the contracting officer is the only one that can accept non-conforming work, waive any requirement of the contract, and modify any term or condition of the contract. And this is one of the types of modifications, the unilateral. This means one way, the contracting officer signs it, not required to be signed by the contractor. Now there's some unilateral contracts mods that are very administrative, if you will, such as, let's say that we issue a contract or a contract modification, and we've included an incorrect fund site on it, for example. We got one number wrong or something like that in the fund site. We can issue a change to the contract unilaterally to correct that administrative error, and nobody's going to have a problem with that. Contractor's not. So, but we've corrected a funding mistake. But the contracting officer can also use a unilateral change order or a unilateral mod to issue a change order. Now, this is a situation. Let's say we're building a building under contract, and all of a sudden, an inspector finds out that the footing for a wall is 6 inches off. They're getting ready to pour the footing. It's already dug, they're getting ready to pour it, and they call the contracting officer, hey, we got a problem. You know, the footing is 6 inches off, and then that's not going to work. And sure enough, it was in the specs that way. And so contracting officer can issue a change order on the spot, even verbally, to make those changes. That's a unilateral change, and it must be later definitized in price or cost with a bilateral change, which we'll get into next. So these are changes authorized by clauses. First of all, the changes are authorized by the changes clause in the contract, and then there are other clauses that we can use to change, such as the property clause, suspension of work clause, and those kinds of things. And we can also issue termination notices. Of course, when you're terminating a contractor, you're not going to ask for their signature. So that's a unilateral modification as well. And a bilateral modification requires a contractor's signature, and we usually negotiate equitable adjustments resulting from a change order that we issued, so that we're definitizing the previous change order with a bilateral change. We can also definitize a letter contract. A letter contract is something we're doing, something we need to do is so urgent that we have to issue a letter, literally, and say, get started, do the work. And then we'll definitize that with a contract and a bilateral contract modification to that letter contract. And a bilateral can also reflect other agreements of the parties modifying the terms and conditions of the contract. But remember, we can only do things that are within a general scope, such as design specifications, method of acceptance, method of performing services. Any changes to requirements or expectations of specific work scope in the contract can be implemented by contract modification, provided it's in the general scope of the contract. So the contractor has a right, when we issue a change order, for example, has a right to an equitable adjustment. And typically on a cost reimbursement contract, that equitable adjustment is fee. If there's additional level of effort of work, the contractor is entitled to additional fee, typically. And a lot of times that's based on a formula that involves increased cost as well. So the contractor, if they can have a claim against the government that we must negotiate with them, but they have a duty to assert that right and that claim in a timely manner. So if we make a change, let's say someone makes a change to the contract, and the contracting officer makes a change, and it's an inadvertent change, and the contractor says, wait a minute, that changes the contract, and we deserve an equitable adjustment. They must give us that notice in a reasonable time. And those times are usually spelled out in the contract. And they have a duty to continue performance. Let's say that, so we actually had this before, where one of our technical offices comes to us with a change. So we need this change. Contracting officer issues a unilateral change order. The contractor says, no, we don't think that's the right thing to do. We're not going to do it. They don't have a right to do that. They must perform. They'll be in breach of their contract if they don't. And that's a provision of the contract that they've agreed to up front, so in the changes clause. And really, I hope I've given you some basics of contracting that are useful to you. If I haven't, please feel free to ask questions, and I'll be more than happy to see what I can do to answer them.
Carl, let's start with you.
Carl Steen, CAB. Let's say you award a contract. I've seen this happen in major cities and counties, and that's not the way the federal government works necessarily. But say you award a contract, and that contractor turns around and starts bringing in other contractors. You could say subcontract. Is there any control or prohibition, or how do you control that?
Okay, so very good question. In DOE, in the cost reimbursement contracting field, on the major contracts that we have to approve the contractor's purchasing system. So in addition to being the contract managers with the contracting officers in my shop, we are also technical assessors, if you will, of the contractor's purchasing system. So that's doing what we do, so they have to purchase. So typically, in cost reimbursement contracting, the subcontracting process is very highly used. So we usually don't have a problem with that unless it's too costly for some reason. And so we work that by saying, okay, you have to get competition. You have to give us your purchasing system, how you're going to purchase. And you tell us that you're going to have competition, or you're going to go to small business, or you're going to do the thing, and we give them small business goals, which they must perform to. So that's pretty much how to be honest with you, we really don't care who does the work, as long as it's done at a reasonable cost. And so that's really the key. They have the right to subcontract, but they have to do it in accordance with the system that we've approved. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Doug?
Doug Howard, CAB. Great presentation. Question I have, and I have a few of them, contracting with foreign entities. You had something on your slide about that. Can you talk a little bit more on how you would deal? Is there any process other than the normal that you go through when you're doing?
With foreign entities?
Right.
There's a Buy American Act that we must comply with. And so it's very rare that we'd write a federal contract with a foreign entity. And if we write a contract with a company that has foreign interests, there's a FOCI requirement for security and those kinds of things. But typically, the contractors that we utilize are U.S. citizen and U.S. contractors.
Okay. When you're doing your, I guess, the business of contracting, how much does continuity from a company that has been working with you, your business, do you look at that at all, or can that be looked at, or how does that pan out? We do. And on the large contracts, we're not going to look at that as much because of the let's face it, there's a lot of money involved, and we're talking about contractors who are wanting to get that work, okay? When it comes, sometimes though, we run into situations where we'll have systems that we're getting support for or buying components for, like IT or something like that, and we need compatibility, for example, with those systems, so we'll look at that. Usually the technical folks who write up the contract requirements will tell us if there's a continuity issue. For example, if we're using a certain system and there's another system available, but the system we've got can only be done by one contractor, and we're probably going to write a sole source justification to go with that contractor again if we can negotiate a reasonable price. And we have to certify the price is fair and reasonable. Last question. How are you able to prevent bias, favoritism in your business?
Well, the FAR is very clear about that. And in the process of awarding a contract, is that what you're talking about, how we award new contracts? Mm-hmm. In the process of award, we're very, very rigid in the kinds of things that we can do. And I've had contractors, this is a very good question, by the way, I've had contractors come to me. I remember before we awarded to SRS, we were getting ready to do that solicitation. I had the Fluor people come to me and say, hey, we're concerned because we think you're just going to award to the incumbent all the time. And you guys are too close to them, and you're going to. I said, listen, it's not that way. There is a level playing field because the source evaluation board is segregated, literally like a jury, and they're out there by themselves, and nobody talks to those people, and they go do their thing and evaluate those proposals in a very independent manner, and then the source selection authority rolls in and reviews their report and makes a decision. So, and I'll tell you, if in fact a contractor can show where our source evaluation board has been influenced incorrectly and unduly, they'll go to GAO, and GAO will set us straight and really cancel everything we're doing. So it's a very rigid, a very highly disciplined and highly controlled process. And so that's basically my answer to your question is we try to make sure. I'll tell you, we've also got ethics officers with regards to our legal office, and they advise us all the time on things. I mean, literally, I can't take a piece of candy from a contractor. I mean, literally, my contracting officers just avoid any kind of appearance of bias.
Thank you.
In situations where your prime contract's already been awarded and you're now faced with change orders to deal with, what kind of tools and methods do you have available to you to determine whether the price that's being asked for the change order is fair and reasonable?
It's very good. There's a thing called an independent government estimate. And so we have to, on any of the change, we have to define what that change is, and then we have to give it to a cost and price analyst to give us an independent government estimate. And that's totally separate from what the contractor is showing us. So one of the tools the contracting officer has, when he gets the proposal, he or she gets a proposal from the contractor, they can compare it against the independent government cost estimate and say, wait a minute, they're way out of line. And we have some of that going on. And so we go back to the contractor and say, you're way out of line. And we want to see why you're so way out of line. And so then we do additional cost analysis of their proposal. But so we'll do independent government cost estimate, we'll do cost analysis of the proposal, and then when there's, and in the kind of work we do, that's pretty much what we're confined to do, really, the tools that we have. If you're talking about more commercialized type contracts, you can go to the GSA schedule and you can compare prices within the industry of whatever you're buying. So there are tools that we can use to make sure, but there is a decision, a document that we have to sign. The contracting officer signs their name and says, the price, I hereby determine that the price is fair and reasonable. If they don't do that, they can't award a contract.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Jerry.
Jerry Mossbarger, CAB. You indicated you have both DOE and NNSA senior procurement executives, and I think you said that rolled all the way down to this level, like at SRS.
Right.
Does that ever create redundancy or conflict? And if so, could you give an example?
It doesn't. It's a very interesting thing. I have a really great relationship with the NNSA head contracting officer, and they're allowed to work under our contract. And anything that has to do with NNSA funding and NNSA work. In fact, the last extension we negotiated for SRS, the NNSA contracting officer and the EM contracting officer, my contracting officer, negotiated together. They were there at the table together. So it usually does not have create conflicts. And contracting officers are kind of a breed apart. They're kind of it's a somewhat of a brotherhood, if you will, and we all know what the requirements are, and there's lots of requirements on a CO. and a CO has a tough job, and they're held accountable for what they do. And so everybody kind of works together to help each other. We all understand the rules, and it's a good thing. It really is. Yeah, Corey Price is the head contracting officer over at NNSA right now. Great guy, and we work closely together.
Thank you.
Dan.
Dan Kaminsky, CAB. Craig, thank you for an excellent presentation. I'm also in the procurement field, but on the commercial side, so I got life a little bit easier than you. The one curiosity that came to mind in years past on the CAB was when we had the safety pause. So post-contract, what are some of the actual penalties that those companies are feeling when, a cost plus from the casual observance of the U.S. citizen, it looked like the supplier still got full pay, got to more or less stop what they're doing, do no actual productive work, and go back to the board with safety processes and processing and things like that. And then they finally pick up steam a few months later. What are some of the actual penalties that they see? I mean, is it on the scoring side? Is it on the award side? Just shed some light on that if you could.
Well, it's all of them, and it's a great question. So starting from the award side, of course, we've got the CPARs. We can write in the Contractor Performance Assessment Reporting System how bad this contractor was in the safety area. And so somebody looking to award the contractor to that contractor is going to say, wait a minute. So that's one thing. As far as the fee, we have a subjective portion, and most of our contracts have a subjective portion of fee. So we can evaluate, and the fee determining officials say, well, yeah, they did everything we asked them to, but they didn't do this well, and they didn't do this, and this was a safety issue, and this was a safety issue. So they can reduce that fee, if you will, that they would otherwise earn. The other thing is in our big contracts, we have what we call the CPOF clause, okay? It's the conditional payment of fee clause. And that's our hammer. That's a big hammer, really big hammer. It can go as much as 75% of the fee. And usually the site manager and the contracting officer work together and decide. And typically we use the CPOF clause. We're going to go to headquarters too and get their blessing on it. But since I was here I've been here at Savannah Riverside since 2006. And at some point during that, we had a fatality that with one of the contractors, and we actually took $4 million from their fee under the CPOF clause. It's conditional payment of fee. It's typically for safety and security, but it can be for other reasons. That clause has been changed around the 2008, 2009 time frame. It used to be only safety and security, but now it could be just about any bad performance situation. So there are definite penalties that we can apply if we have to.
Thank you. Narinder.
My question is entirely altogether different. When I came here, SRS, WSRC was the contractor. And later on, they were bought by Morrison Knudsen. And then they were bought by Washington International. And then they were bought by URS. How do you handle these so many multi-layers of owners?
It's free enterprise. I mean, we can't really do anything about it. They have a right to sell their businesses, and the new owner assumes all of the terms and conditions of the contract that the old one did. So it's all the same. To us, it's really no different. Who it is that's performing the contract, you must meet the terms and conditions of the contract. Our only relationship with the contractor is the contract, really. And so you must meet those terms and conditions. As long as they do, it really is irrelevant, if you will, to us who it is that owns the company.
Does it make any difference in the scope of work?
No. The scope of work never changes because of a contractor selling their business to another contractor, for example. So I don't think so.
I have another simple question.
Okay.
I think in early 2000, British Nuclear Company came on site to manage the solid waste management. Was it a foreign country working at SRS?
No, not in the nuclear waste business. No, we didn't have a foreign entity.
No, British Nuclear was British company. They were managing solid waste management.
I wasn't aware of. I'm not aware of that. Jim, could you talk to that?
It was back in the 90s, Craig.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it was back in the 90s when BNFL was on board. But they had to go through the FOCI and everything else.
Okay, yeah. So they were one of the one of the partner.
They were a team member.
Subcontractors. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Greg.
Thank you. Greg Murray, CAB. Craig, thank you for your interesting presentation. I think my interest in this was piqued by a presentation we had last year, and it might have contributed to you having to come in front of us today. We had a discussion about a contractor who, as I recall the details, provided a bunch of valves to us. It turned out they were faulty. We had to, you remember the story, I'm sure, and we were probably involved with it. Turned out they were faulty. We'd paid them for them. We ended up them having to remake them. I think what was it, salt waste processing facility, I think it was. Asked them, they had to remake the valves. I think it set us back a couple of years, as I remember. And for some reason that I would like to understand further, we ended up paying them again for the valves that they produced that were faulty to begin with. And I'm wondering, I don't know how free you are to comment on that specific case, but I certainly would like to know, in our contracting process, what mechanisms allow that to happen? Because it certainly seems to fly in the face of common sense.
Okay. Well, I'm not at liberty to talk specifically about that issue. What I can tell you from a hypothetical standpoint, changes that the government directs, we have to pay for. If it changes to a contract, for example. So, for example, if someone installs components that are not acceptable and fail, then the contractor usually has to perform that over. And so any of those components would have to be performed over by the contractor at their cost. Cost reimbursement is a little different. The government takes all the cost risk, but there are inspection and acceptance clauses in the contract that allows us to make them reperform, if you will, at their own cost. If in fact components are not found to be defective until they fail, and their failure is unacceptable, then the government may decide that we need to replace those regardless if they failed or not. And that is a government-directed change. So if the consequence of the failure cannot be borne and it's untenable, then the government may make a decision to replace those components. Do you see what I'm saying? So it comes to whether or not it's a government-directed change.
I can certainly see that. That was not my impression of what had happened in this particular case, that we asked them for a product that they delivered and the product was faulty, and we paid them to redeliver the products again. You're saying, though, that makes sense in some conception of the way the government contracts?
If in fact the government directed the change, the government's responsible for the payment. That's kind
okay.
of
This was my impression was this was not a change that we directed. They delivered a valve that did not open and close appropriately.
Again, I cannot.
Okay. Yeah, because maybe I just have the wrong information.
I think I can go a little further than where Craig has been taking us on this one. But in the case with salt waste processing facility, you had valves that were failing and they were not failing at any kind of predictable rate. And this was happening in a facility that was not yet in hot operations. So if you're going to have something to fail and you're going to have issues with them, at least from my perspective, you'd much rather have that happen before you get into hot operations or anything of that sort. And so because we couldn't predict when those things were going to fail, the government made a decision that it would much rather replace those valves, and that's where Craig was going with. It's now a government-directed change because we wanted to have those removed from the facility before we got into hot operations. Because if you can't predict how they're going to fail, and we didn't want to deal with the consequences of failure after we've gotten into hot operations.
Okay, thank you.
Joyce Underwood, Cab. How many contractors on average bid for a contract?
How many contractors bid for a contract? It varies. A lot of times with the smaller contracts, there could be 10 or 12. With the large contractors, typically 2 or 3. That's what we usually get.
Is a workforce security clearance a stipulation for bidding on a contract, or is that included in their price with their offer?
Yes, it is. Some of the contracts that we have, those large contracts that have legacy workforces, basically primarily the only change that we see is the change in key personnel, in the management staffs of these contractors when a new one comes in. And usually the workforce pretty much stays the same. And so their security clearances will go on. But you're right, for the key personnel, the security clearances are required, and but on a cost reimbursement contract, the government bears the cost for that.
But does that preclude new players in the field, so to speak?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the
Does
question.
that preclude new players in the field? Like if a new company came along and wanted to get in on it, would that keep them out of the game?
No, I don't think so, because they would be able to process security clearances just like anybody else, or apply for security clearances just like anybody else.
And that's part of their fee that you pay?
That would be part of the cost of the contract. That we would bear the cost for the cost of security clearances.
Okay. And speaking of cost, are materials and expenses paid via reimbursement, or the contractors issue government charge cards?
Okay, give me that one more time.
Like when they have to go get materials, do they pay for it and then you pay them back, or do you give them government charge cards?
Oh, no. They typically, their purchasing system may actually utilize cards, but they're their own cards, and we will reimburse them normally.
So not like the military, they don't just get to run off with a government charge card?
Well, the federal employees at Savannah Riverside will have government purchase cards. So I do manage the purchase card program for the federal staff, but the contractor's purchasing system manages the purchase card program for the contractor staff.
So you don't deal with that?
No.
Okay.
We oversee them in doing that, but no, we don't manage it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Tom.
Tom French, the cab. Excellent talk, but I have a question. If Jim needs to extend one of his contracts, does he first go to you to start the activity?
Typically, we start the activity because we see the contract coming to an end and we don't have a new one.
I got you.
And so we're going to need to process an extension. And so that's something that, yes, Jim and I work together, but typically that's something that we're going to be in charge of trying to do.
Thank you.
Dave.
Dave Vabagas, Cab. Thank you for your presentation. Let me just follow on to that, if I could, please. Hypothetically, let's say you're at the Kroger, and one of your acquaintances or neighbors runs into you and says, "I have a son who just started a business, and I understand that they're doing a lot of that type of business at the Savannah River site." Would you direct them to Fed Biz Ops? Is that the route that they would go, or?
That's correct. That's where I would, if it was federal contracts, yes, they go to Fed Biz Ops. If not, they go to the Savannah River Nuclear Solutions website for their procurement office, or the SRR website, or Parsons website, and I would just say, do that. Now, I cannot influence in any way that person getting business. I would be going to jail if I did that, so I can't do that.
Also, under the federal contracting umbrella, there are other types of contracts, interagency agreements. We've heard from the forestry people who come in here and harvest timber, and there are grants. Can you talk about some of those opportunities?
I can. We have grants. Before coming here to Savannah Riverside, I was at Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for 4 years. I had over 2,000 grants under me at that time. So the grants are different from contracts in that they're for a public purpose, where a contract is for a government purpose, running the government, and a grant is for a public purpose. And so that's how you basically tell the difference between them. So we do have some grants. The Ecology Lab with the University of Georgia, we have a grant with them. That's in my office. And we do have interagency agreements. We have an interagency agreement with the Corps of Engineers, and they provide services sometimes to us under some of their contracts. Other than that, I don't know exactly what to tell you.
Last question, following on to what Carl was talking about earlier with subcontractors. With most of the major federal acquisitions that I've seen, there are set-asides. And I jotted down a few that I was familiar with: 8As, the small disadvantaged businesses. Hub zone, I know James' employer is an Indian tribe, which I think is a hub zone. Small disadvantaged veteran-owned businesses and women-owned small businesses. What percentage of the major acquisitions at Savannah Riverside do these set-asides do they comprise?
So we have two things. So since we award such large dollars to our large contractors, and in very few cases, it's a rare case that a small business could run this site, could do one of the M&O's job, could do a $10 billion contract, for example. So what we depend on is putting very strict goals on our contractors in their procurement process to award to small business. So it's somewhere in the area of 50, 52%. SRS has been knocking the top out of that. They've been going 80 and 90% a month on small businesses. So they're actually leading DOE in that area. Very, very good performance. SRR continuously meets their goals. So does Centerra. So we have a small business office that works with them and has small business fairs and things like that with them. But that's where we depend on getting the small businesses involved, because we award such large dollars. So if you were to look at my percentage from a federal award standpoint, it would be like 1.2, something like that, or maybe 5%, because I don't have the dollars to award. I award them to the big companies. But we depend on them to take those dollars. And when they, like for example, SRS may spend $300 million a year in subcontracts. And so if you get 60, 70% of that, that's a pretty good small business work.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Charles, you've been waiting patiently.
Greg, I want to follow up on yours. I'm Charles Hilton with CAB. And Mr. Johnson, your comments, what was unique about those valves? And I raised the question why we paid another $5 million for them. If DOE, if you had issued, Greg, a purchase order for these valves and they didn't do what they were supposed to be, I can understand you eating the cost. My understanding on Saltstone, it was a design build. Parsons designed it and somebody built it. Well, the design engineers, everybody was at fault as far as contractors. I've dealt with contractors all my life, engineers including. And when they have a design error, they have to pay for it. And I didn't understand why, and I think Greg is struggling with this, why the taxpayer ended up having to pay the $5 million when you paid a contractor to design it, spec it, buy it, and another contractor to put it in. And then, and I understand why all of them were replaced. I understand the accountability. We're dealing with nuclear waste. We don't want an error down the road. But I don't understand how taxpayers got stuck with the burden of it.
So I'll defer to Thomas if you want to answer. I've got an answer, but okay. To me, from a contracting officer standpoint, it comes down to inspection and acceptance. If I'm willing to go out and make every single one of those valves fail, I can make the contractor pay for every one of them. Not a problem. I don't think we can do that. Some of them are working. They're working fine. So how do we tell the contractor to replace them? How do we say you did a bad job? They're working. But we can't, the risk of them not working is so bad that there may be a decision that we have to replace it anyway. And there's an obsolescence issue here with regards to being installed so long ago, who can service it, those kinds of things. Thomas.
That's a very good response, Craig. The other thing that we do from an accountability standpoint, we talk, and I think it was Joyce that part of response to Joyce, and Craig was trying to point out the difference between cost and fee. You were making a statement regarding whether we're covering their fee. In contract parlance, when we talk about cost, what did it cost, for particular materials, and fee, it typically is more what you should think of as profit for the company, not so much what something was costing you to get. And so in this particular case here, I tried to cover it the first time around, but if you could predict when something was going to fail or precisely how it was failing, then you can go after the contractor for it. And we've got a couple of different ways in doing that. We can deal with them in the fee space where we reduce or even eliminate fee associated with particular items or a particular scope of work. Is one way to deal with it in the accountability, but in this particular instance, because of the facility, because of the type of things that we're going to be doing in that facility, we being the government, could not take the risk of having those failures when that facility comes online because of potential harm to the facility itself, as well as additional cost in now trying to replace valves once those lines have now carried nuclear materials through them versus these failures happening when we were just doing water runs through the facility.
And if I could say one thing, the particular issue you're talking about, which I am a little reluctant to talk about because of procurement sensitivity, and the reason I am is because that matter has not been settled yet from a negotiation standpoint. So we're still in negotiations on that, and to what extent the contractor is going to be held accountable and what legally we can hold them accountable has yet to be determined.
So, you've probably described that particular incident about as thoroughly as you are allowed to, given the history. So let's maybe move off of SWPF if we can and pick up some other questions if possible. Greg? Nope. Okay. It was about that. All right.
Sorry, I'll finish up real quick on my thought at least. Greg Murray, Cab. I don't think I'm not at least concerned. I understand why you replaced the valves. Makes perfect sense to me. I think what I would assume as a purchaser, though, that I can expect and depend on the reliability of the product I'm buying, and it doesn't sound like we could do that, and they were failing at such a rate that it was too high of a rate, and therefore they didn't deliver the product we expected them to deliver. If you bought a fleet of 100 trucks and 50 of them failed under the first 100 miles, or however you want to look at it, I would suggest that the vendor had not provided the trucks that we offered, and I wouldn't go and buy another 100 trucks from them, even though I needed the trucks. So it's not that, it's what you did, it sounds to me very reasonable that you replaced them. What I'm concerned about is that we paid them again to do it. That's my only thought on that. So, and by the way, and Craig, just from a general perspective, if this is allowed in government contracting, this is one of the reasons why the public gets so discouraged with the government and the way it spends money. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Let me just comment on that, and I'll say that okay, we're in a cost reimbursement situation because of the work is fairly nebulous and we can't price it in advance for a fixed price. Cost reimbursement is not the best way to do federal contracting. If we can avoid that, we're going to always try to do a fixed price. We can't avoid it in this situation, so we have to try to manage it. And in a cost reimbursement environment, the government assumes all costs. And that's the nature of the beast, if you will. So.
Joyce Underwood, CAB. Hopefully this is a less contentious question. There's been a lot of talk about things that have been manufactured for different machines, projects, et cetera, and from the time that whatever it was manufactured to whenever it needed to be replaced, either company wasn't around or, things happen. Is there any mechanism in place that you know of to kind of retain that knowledge so that those sorts of things don't happen and create bigger problems?
From a contracting perspective, the only thing I can think of is sometimes we award sole source contracts based on industrial mobilization. In other words, there are so few companies that provide a service or a product that we need to keep those companies in business. And so we can actually are allowed by Congress to use the exception to the Competition and Contracting Act for industrial mobilization. DOE labs are an example of that, by the way. So when we extend a lab contract, we're using that authority. But that's the only thing I can think of.
Is there no way to stipulate within the contract that somehow the information of how a thing was manufactured be included in what you purchase?
There is. There are rights to data clauses, other things. If we have an important issue, or if we're buying something that's so critical that we need that data, we can ask for it in the contract.
But they don't have to give it to you?
If they agree to the contract, they do have to,
Okay.
yes. So they have to sign the contract.
All right, thank you.
All right. I think that'll do it. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
All right, folks. Let's take 10. Let's be back in our seats at 2:30. And on an unrelated note, if anyone happens to have 2 Tylenol, I would appreciate it. Thank you. She's found her seat. She's just not sitting in it. You don't want to? You got to. Heels coming down. How many have we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. That's close enough. All right, folks. It's 2:30. Let's get started. Up next, we have a presentation that always generates lots of questions, lots of interest. It's the military training update. I know you're like, please don't prime them for that. It's okay. They're going to pay attention now. So, you all know Zach Todd. Zach, take it away.
My name is Zach Todd. I work within the Office of Integration and Planning, and today I'm wearing my military hat. Generally, my day-to-day job is budget formulation, but I also do the DOE oversight of military training at SRS. So I know it says military training update, but we're also going to talk about the land use at Savannah River Site. I'll kind of give you a glimpse of what's kind of going on down the pipe. And then we're going to talk about why we're doing this presentation as well. All right, so just some acronyms for you. If there's something I say or if there's something that's in the slide deck, kind of consult back here. All right, so the purpose from a community perspective, provide recommendation on military land use and land permit at SRS. This is important. It's been several years, but you'll see this on the next slide. Department of Army signed an agreement with Department of Energy, and then there was an interagency agreement signed between Fort Gordon and SRS. And South Carolina National Guard has been working for the past several years to come up with their own, we'll say, formal document that codifies this agreement. That's where you guys enter in. I can't tell you to do a recommendation, but I can ask very nicely. If you guys could provide a recommendation specifically for the South Carolina National Guard and their functions here, it'd be very much appreciated. All right, so the agenda, kind of went over this. We'll go a little bit over the background, kind of the points and stuff that led up to this point. The agreements, those are those formal documents that I talked about, to some key points on the government or the rules pertaining to military training here at Savannah River Site, why they come here, the facilities and type of training that they're actually doing at Savannah River Site, and then the South Carolina National Guard land at SRS, and then we'll sum it up. All right, so a lot of folks ask, like, all the time, why does the military want to train at SRS? There's a lot of different reasons. One, we have a whole bunch of land there, right? There's a 312 square miles, so there's a big amount of land, a large amount of open space. But if you just take that and put to the side, the military has actually had a lot of different challenges over the years. There was BRAC, a Base Realignment and Closure Act, that was several years ago. I can't give you the exact year, but that shut down some of the installations, the stuff that the military had access to train on. So you have that, you have different technologies and stuff coming up. With these technologies, the military focuses very much on standoff distance, so how far a weapon can fire. These different weapon systems are taking further and further, bigger distance. They have to increase the size of their ranges. And what happens is there's less land for them to train at already established locations. So they look at different agreements, different federal lands where they can start doing different trainings and stuff, and are in Savannah River Site. Environmental restrictions, they have the same things that Savannah River has. I don't want to say encroachment, that's the bad word, but there's endangered species and things of that nature that do get protected. Military installations are federal lands, so they're very, very serious about any type of environmental impacts and stuff. Okay, so strategies, maximize what they have, and then use other federal lands. Enter in us. All right, for us, it really just makes sense for us to support. So we have, DOE has a very large interest in national security. We're kind of founded in it. So it's compatible with a lot of our missions. You see the different processes and stuff like that. Ultimately, there's a lot of things that we support that are either rooted in DOD type Department of Defense or support Department of Defense type activities. The military experiences from a lot of the training and stuff here. The National Lab has a whole set of experts that do great scenarios and stuff for the military, and that's a large pool for the military is the scenarios and stuff the lab can construct. They can't do it anywhere else but here. So that's just kind of like the sum up right there. Oh, actually, sorry. We also have some unique facilities. If you kind of look around the current landscape of the world, and you kind of see what's going on. We won't go into a lot of details, but the facilities that we have at Savannah River Site are unique, and they're applicable all over the world for some different countries and stuff like that. So think of 1950s era nuclear technology, those type of facilities. All right, so the agreements, kind of what I was talking about in the very beginning. Back in 2007, Department of Army and DOE headquarters signed a memorandum of agreement that says, DOE, Army, you guys can go play together, go execute it in the form of a memorandum or interagency agreement. And that's what happened. An interagency agreement was signed between SRS and Fort Gordon. Fort Gordon was going to be kind of the portal for the military training. And we kind of laid out the different rules and stuff that, hey, this is how this makes this possible. And that was done in 2009. About 2013, 2014, Fort Gordon said they didn't want to do this anymore. They were facing budget cuts. Frankly, with them being more of a TRADOC post, they didn't have a lot of different units that was utilizing Fort Gordon, so it was just kind of a tax on them, and they didn't have much interest in keeping the relationship going further. South Carolina National Guard, they've been chomping at the bit. They saw the opportunity, they raised their hand, I want it, and they've been here ever since. So, and that's kind of where we've been stuck. We have the formal documentations between the Department of Army, DOE, so all those documentations there, but we've been working over the past several years, and what we've been trying to do is get that formal doc between South Carolina National Guard, Savannah River Site, or whatever appropriate level to get back on the National Guard side. And that's where I was kind of seeking that recommendation from earlier. So everything that we do, those hierarchy documents actually outlaid a we call it a JSOP, Joint Standard Operating Procedure, but that details all the processes and pretty much the rules to play by. It's very specific all the way down to what activities that can happen, down to track vehicles. You can't do this, you can't do this, you can do this, this is how you do this. There's a lot of details in it. Of course, we won't go through all that, but there is a process that exists. There's a process that we follow that kind of like governs all this different training that happens at Savannah River Site. So, in a nutshell, that document, it says a lot of different things, and it really details the processes, but these are the big things. It can't interfere any type of site operations at Savannah River Site. So our mission is our primary focus. Nothing that the military can do can affect or have a negative consequence of our operations or any of our missions at Savannah River Site. Has a de minimis cost, did I say that right, Max? Yay. To Savannah River Site, so there can't really be a cost to us, and there really isn't. Military responsible for the training activities and overall safety. We don't take on any liability with the military training here. They have to provide all their different medevac support. And they take the liability for their training. Of course, if the worlds align and our assets are there and available and they doesn't affect us, of course we'll provide support. Now, it talks about the pre-coordinated training, and that's kind of what's spelled out in JSOP. We have a 90, 60, 30-day meeting, so at the very least, a training is briefed 3 times. The 90 days out, 60 days out, 30 days out. And the idea behind that is we have a lot of different stakeholders and a lot of different tenants at Savannah River Site, and it's to make sure that there's no upses, and we deconflict any type of things that are going on within the Forest Service, the Ecology Lab, security, and all those types such. So, and really, like, they'll point out if there's a prescribed burn, something of that nature, they'll point that stuff out that, hey, training is not going to be available for this period of time based in these areas, and we'll kind of work through that. And it's important to, again, it can't have an impact to the missions at Savannah River Site, but it doesn't mean that things can't be shuffled around if it's no impact. And then the military is very good at actually protecting the site environmental and the cultural resources. Again, they're on federal lands. They're very familiar with the red cockaded woodpecker and those type of species. All right, so now we go into the picture slideshow. Why are they so interested in our land? So most of the training that happens with the military, in the past probably 5 years, there's been thousands and thousands, I'd say over 4,000 or 5,000 military service members that have trained at Savannah River Site. Primarily, it's west of 125, though, so think D area, just south of Cracker Neck along the river. And these are the facilities that we have. Some of these pictures are a little bit older. They don't look quite as nice anymore. And yeah, they're falling down in a lot of different places. But, so the D area powerhouse is pictured here. And The military loves using it because it's a very large industrial complex that, frankly, something like this, it doesn't exist in any of the military installations that they have the ability to go in and train. So we have a lot of different units that come in and try to assault the powerhouse and take it over from different bad guys. And that's just another picture of it. So this was actually the location of our largest military exercise. We had upwards to 40 aircraft and about 200 to 300 soldiers on the ground at this particular time. This was 3-4 years ago. This was Carolina Thunder. If any of y'all remember that, I think I might have talked about it. But several Apache helicopters, several F-16, and then we've had a couple infantry companies actually assaulting the D-area powerhouse as well. So big, large exercise that they were actually able to do at Savannah River Site. So typically, though, we don't have so many conventional units that actually train at Savannah River Site. These are more type of special operation units. So they come in the middle of the night, no effect on anything that's really going on at Savannah River Site. Another thing that they love training at is the pump house. This is, again, is in D area. It provides the subterranean different levels. That's a big focus in the military right now. So this is a great training venue for them. And again, some of that 1950s era technology or nuclear facilities that they have different scenarios for, and they have different skill sets that they're trying to be proficient at. And this is what it looked like several years ago. It does not look like this anymore. It's dark, and I believe there's actually some water in the bottom of it right now, but it still provides the concrete. It provides the structure for these folks to train in, and frankly, we're not necessarily worried about them breaking anything that's in there. And it's true. This is a MARSOC unit that actually came in and did their raid. It's pretty neat to see these guys in action. And again, this is in the middle of the night, so really for Savannah River Site, it's no impact. This is the rail yard. So I'll go ahead and say right now, 80% of the site is available for military training at Savannah River Site, 80%. There's some areas that are off limits for obvious reasons, and then you have the different environmental restrictions and different areas that they can't go into for different concerns. But 9 out of 10 times the training is going to take place west of 125 along the river within that D area. The railroad is not within that area, but it provides another training venue for these folks. And this is going to be important for South Carolina National Guard, is a lot of mechanisms on how they get money for some stuff that we're talking about later, is having certain requirements and stuff, and a rail yard is one of those requirements. But one of the coolest trainings that we've had here is, and I believe the lab actually hosted and was able to facilitate the training, is they had a locomotive going down the track and they landed a helicopter on the moving train, capturing the bad guy. So there's actually some really good training and some very, very, I'm just going to say cool trainings opportunities that the military do here at Savannah River Site that they typically can't do a lot of different places. All right, so now we're going to kind of shift gears into what the South Carolina National Guard has actually done here at Savannah River Site. So prior training that the military has done, the training that we talked up to this point, is it doesn't really do anything for the Department of Energy. It doesn't hurt us, but it doesn't really help us. So a couple of years ago, we got creative and we thought it's like, hey, how can we merge training requirements for the military and work that is currently unfunded at Department of Energy, Savannah River Site, and maybe we can put these two together and get something, mutually beneficial out of it. So we did. So I think about 4 years, it's been 4 years. The first year we did 3 different projects. We did the new Fire Pond Dam, B area stormwater basin, and then the sludge lanes. The new Fire Pond Dam was a failing dam. Well, I don't know if it was failing, but it was going down the road towards failing. And they drained it, and they were actually to remove a whole bunch of dirt and put that down to a safe level, so it was a risk mitigation / avoidance for us. The B area stormwater basin, strictly propaganda. It's right outside of B area, so we wanted to see the military trucks doing things, so that's why we selected that project, pure and simple, so everyone can see it. And then the sludge lanes. Several years ago, you guys remember the ice storm that hit Aiken and really the surrounding area. So the way that our sewage is treated is it's put in these different tanks, and eventually those tanks are spread along these sludge lanes within the trees. So the storm actually damaged these lanes, sludge lanes, and we'll just say the sewage tanks were filling up with the, so use your imagination. So they were able to actually come in here, clear out these lanes for us, stuff that wasn't in our budget, and we were able to start disposing of the sludge again. And then here's some of the pictures and stuff from that. That's the B area stormwater basin, and these are from the dam. Now, this is the aerial picture. A little fly thing didn't work. You can kind of get a sense of how big the picture is. This is an aerial that we took with one of the helicopters from Centera, but that's the dump truck and that's a big old excavator. And you can kind of see how far they actually dug down. This was hundreds of loads of dirt. What you can't see is the dump trucks running in the background all the way back over to a borrow pit that they established. Hundreds of loads of dirt. They provided all the equipment, all the fuel, all the labor. We had to provide some very, for us, incidental engineering support, and really just STRs are the technical reps to provide oversight for the project, just kind of like what we do for a subcontractor, honestly. And they took care of it all. And it was saved the site. I can't remember the exact number, but I want to say like well over $1 million just with these different projects and stuff right here. So the engineers that performed this, the unit that actually performed this, they got their operators trained on the different equipment. And more importantly, they actually got a mission. So typically speaking, and this is like from Army experience, if you have a bulldoze operator that needs to get training on a bulldozer, they'll go out to a flat field, move some dirt around, and then when they're done, they'll have to move the dirt right back so they have a nice level field. So instead of just them moving around dirt for no reason, we're actually able to pair that with an actual need, and that's what happened here. And to my knowledge, it was the first of its kind in Department of Energy where the military actually formed or had a training opportunity that equaled work on our end. So the following year, after that, that was our crawl, sort of say. We got a little bit more ambitious, and we looked at different projects. There were a lot of different projects that were on the table, and we eventually settled on phase 2 of 288F Ash Basin. So this is over by Mox in that area, if you're familiar. And this was a basin from a coal power plant back in several years ago. And there are several phases. I believe there's 8 or 10 phases. And this is phase 2. And this is kind of like a very, very brief, if you look at the last few bullets and stuff, kind of like the scope of work. But it was a huge project for us at the time. It was 140 different soldiers training over 6 weeks. And they brought a bunch of equipment. And this is what you'll see right there. So I don't know how well you can see those pictures, but there's dozens and dozens of trucks, dozens of bulldozers, dozens of excavators. They brought it all. And again, at very, very little cost to Savannah River site. They provided the labor, they provided the fuel, they provided the actual meals, they provided the lodging for those 140 folks that were out of the area. And we had to provide the engineering support and really just the oversight to make sure that project went how we planned it out. And they were able actually to accomplish 288. Here's you can kind of see all on the left here. Oh, laser. That was all grown up trees and stuff, and that's where they actually cleared out and started moving some of the ash and stuff kind of back where it was supposed to go. Give you an idea. Again, very, very limited cost on us. I believe I saw a cost estimate for it that it saved us the site over $2 million. And then the important thing is, this was unfunded at the time. It really wasn't even on a horizon, but we were able to kind of get some of this work done in the meantime without jeopardizing anything in our current budget. All right, so kind of shifting gears again. Briefly kind of talked earlier in the slide or the presentation about South Carolina National Land at Savannah River site. So as some of y'all know, that there was the South Carolina National Guard signed a license, I believe, license or permit for 750 acres at Savannah River site. So you have the picture or the map of Savannah River site, and then that area, it's kind of the blow up here. So the 750 acres, this is B area right here. And if you're familiar with the cloverleaf, that's right there. That's the Jackson Gate. And this is 125 right coming down here. approximately 458 acres right there is going to the South Carolina National Guard. It's licensed, permitted. It's still Department of Energy's land. We're never able to get rid of it, but they signed a long-term license / permit. And you also have a smaller plot of land down here by El Lake, which is previously Gun Site 51. And this is going to be kind of like the FOB area, if you will, where they'll be doing like the field training exercises. This is going to be the administrative area where they'll have their different, the dining facilities, the administrative buildings, things of that nature. All right, so just kind of a blow up of that land right there so you can kind of see. Just for your reference, I believe that's 730B right there. That's where, if you're familiar, you actually did your new site or new cab member orientation at the very beginning in that building. So across the street from that, that's the land that we're talking about. And then I'm pretty sure not many people have been down to El Lake, but there's going to be some land down by El Lake along 125 in El Lake that goes to the military. This will be that FOB training area where they'll have just some like pole barns, some type of thing. Think of a deployed environment. And then this is going to be like the administrative type garrison area. Think of when you actually go, you'll actually see the buildings and stuff like that, which are kind of years in advance. Just another layout of what we're looking at and stuff. So, in kind of in summary, the military has embraced our safety culture. To date, there hasn't really been any significant injuries and really no significant damage to any land or facilities at Savannah River site. We have a strong partnership. The military they really, really enjoy Savannah River National Lab. There's a lot of different training exercises that the lab can do for them that they can't get anywhere in the world. Just the skill set, think about the skill set that are over at the National Lab, especially with the environmental like remediation, and then some of they can actually do a lot of different training scenarios with actual like live radioactive isotopes that can't be done at typical military installations. So they're actually able to give them more live, more realistic training that they couldn't do on their own. So it's a great partnership just in that own little way right there. So, and frankly, it continues to mature. We just signed this agreement. It's been a couple years, but with them getting the land. That's not the end. Hopefully they're going to build facilities, and then we're going to continue to align these partnerships, and we're going to find these mutually beneficial type arrangements, projects, things of that nature where everything kind of works together. So with that, is there any questions?
You know what? Who haven't we started with today? We haven't started off with Betty yet. Let's start with Betty today. Yep.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. I just have a comment. This is probably whatever. If you have National Guard owned site training, which is wonderful, and we have this overpopulation of pigs, and they have to train in weapons, why can't we just send them out on the range? Thank you.
That's Doug's question.
So I'll say this. We've thought about this, semi-jokingly. So to date, and now serious. So to date, Savannah, there has been no live fire type exercises at Savannah River site. We're working on that. We're looking at like utilizing the range that's there, but outside of that, it's all it's blank ammunition, no live fire type exercises. But we have thought of that.
Brian.
We could buy them ammunition. Thanks.
Brian Chemsack, Cab. I noticed that they were doing some real work out there that was their training, in that it was kind of left in place. Like you said, they didn't have to go back and regrade it to the existing condition. Since it was just a 6-week training effort, if on-site there was problems from runoff or erosion after they left, are they able to remobilize and come back and fix any of those issues?
Yeah, so specifically with the dam, is that what you're talking about?
Either one of the projects.
Okay. So, and this is where there was that support cost. There was some soldiers that actually came back and did do some reseeding, but they were able to do the majority of the erosion control measures while they're still on site. They work extremely fast. They have a very short window of time to complete a lot of training, so they're working 14 hours a day, a lot of these folks. So the speed that the work happens is a little bit more than, I guess, when we're accustomed to. But there was some additional support costs where we had to have folks go back and reseed some small areas and stuff like that. But
Tom French, the cab. Thanks, Zach. I just want to ask if you'd come to our next committee meeting and talk about this in a little bit more depth.
Of course, I'll be there.
All right, thanks.
Doug.
Doug Howard, Cap. I really like that idea that you're talking about. Yeah, that would be a lot of fun. I'd like to be in on that too. I got two questions for you, Zach, and a great presentation. First one is, Centera, do they work hand in hand with the military on any force-on-force training?
No, and frankly, I don't think we would even entertain that.
Okay. The other question is, have you ever thought about, you said that Fort Gordon has kind of opted out on doing anything with you all?
Yeah, for the most part. Again, they used to control the training from the military side. They were kind of like the portal owner, if you will. And they just didn't want to do it. And there's a lot of reasons. They really don't have the units over there that would facilitate this type of, or would conduct these type of training. So from their perspective, they had their range control type folks that were being loaned out to Savannah Riverside to support units that were not here, the special operation folks. And it just didn't sit well with them. My words, but kind of what I think.
I can agree with you on that, but I think something that you might want to think about is just to make them aware of what is here and what goes on here. You may want to think about having a what we call a right seat ride with a lot of senior NCOs and officers from Fort Gordon to kind of make them aware of what is here and what you all do here. I think it would be very interesting for them, and it give them a lot of probably information that they don't readily have at hand.
Yeah, so let me just comment one thing on there. So they're just not the custodian of the training here. We actually have soldiers and sailors, Marines, all those types that actually still come here to Savannah Riverside, primarily linking up with the National Lab and some of the cyber initiatives. So Fort Gordon is well aware of what we have here at Savannah Riverside. There was, I believe, the garrison commander toured not too long ago. And so that type of interactions they're still happening. They just didn't want oversight of the training, or they didn't want to be responsible for the training at Savannah Riverside.
And not only the training I'm talking about, but just to make them kind of well informed of what's here. Okay. And for a lot of because like when I first got here, I had no idea what this area, this site consisted of. So it might be something you may want to throw out there, and it may draw some interest with a lot of their senior NCOs and officers out there, So, but thanks. Great presentation.
Jim.
Jim Gill, Cap. I didn't see anything about the Forest Service, and I thought they were supposed to be custodians of the area, of the land. So they have an involvement in all of this, or do they need to be part of this?
So at that 90, 60, 30-day meeting, this is their involvement. And then I'm going to punt the ball on the custodian thing because I'm not exactly sure how that works. But the 90, 60, 30-day meeting, they're actually there. They're one of the tenants, one of the stakeholders that I'm talking about. So and honestly, they're one of our primary concerns. You got the Ecology Lab, the Forest Service. Those are the folks that are, there's others, but they have a lot of remote workers, as we call them, a lot of folks that are in these areas where the military would train. So we're doing those deconflictions and talking to them, make sure that they don't have any events going in these different areas. Now, coming back to the custodian question.
A couple of things there. With the Forest Service, and then where most of the training work was being conducted here. Zach showed you pictures, and it was in facilities in the area. the Forest Service would have no real involvement in that within the facilities. And then when they were out actually doing some of the remediation work, again, Forest Service would not have any role in things like that as well.
Let's go around to Dave.
Dave Isley, Cab. Thank you, Zach. That's good brief. Good brief. I want to verify what I heard you say. Presently, the Guard does not use ADA, but you're looking at it. Is that at their request?
So, yes. I mean, there's a lot of different requirements with how they receive funding at their installations and what they're trying to do at Savannah Riverside, for instance, to get so many different buildings. They have to have these different criterias met. One of them is like power projection, hence the railhead. One is like the ability to train a company-sized maneuver for certain different levels, and then others are live fire ranges. So we've talked about it, we've looked at it, we haven't pulled the trigger and committed towards that yet. So there's been discussion, we're looking at it, nothing as of yet.
Okay, well, just a thought. I witnessed aerial gunnery at ADA, and that thing would be perfect for the Blackhawks. So, pass that on to Tommy. He might make a couple calls.
Will do. We weren't even looking at anything that complex. We were very, very small scale to say that we did it, and there's a lot of considerations, right? Centera, they have a lot of different requirements, making sure that they're doing their job, and we have to do any type of training or any type of utilization of that range after them or outside of their needs. So there's a lot of considerations, and we just haven't got there yet.
Okay, understand. The other question is Gun Site 51. I guess you turn over responsibility to the Guard. There were a lot of other organizations. It was a big exercise right before I left where the FBI did their sneaky stuff. Would they be like coordinating that, or that would just be theirs and the FBI would have to find someplace else to do their thing?
No, so the idea is, and to date, there's already been there's a building down there now. It's an old trailer, and that was through the military. But the idea is the military would be able to upgrade the facilities in and around there, be able to accommodate more training that the lab actually does. So that's the intent. That's the benefit for us. The lab will have some updates in facilities. This is kind of like the long-term goal. They will have different accommodations, maybe a classroom down there where they can actually host these trainings. And then if there's no conflictions with the military at that time, they can utilize it.
Okay, multi-use facility then.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Narendra Balak, Cab. Zach, you mentioned that National Guard is going to take over 400 acres in B area. Is that area where Wecanut used to have a training jog trail and choppers area and some other area? Are they going to take that area?
Say it one more time.
Wecanut used to have a running trail in front of somewhere in the B area next to the chopper.
Oh, so here we go. This is best. You said the running track? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you look at here, let me get a little closer so I can see here. The running track is actually right here.
Okay.
And then that's the hangar, if I'm not mistaken. So the area that the military is looking at is across the street. This is the B area labs right here, the biology labs. It'll be the area right behind here.
I got you. And my other question is, are they going to use the live ammunition for training?
Blank ammunition for training to date, yes.
Not live.
Not live ammunition.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Joyce.
Joyce Underwood, Cab. So you said that you're currently only working with South Carolina National Guard. Is the Department of Energy or Savannah River National Lab interested or considering courting any other military units?
Okay, so if I said only working with South Carolina National Guard. That's not what I meant to say. I meant the South Carolina National Guard facilitates the training for the military for us. So they're kind of our designated representative for the military, and then we oversee that training because so many different considerations with coming to Savannah River Site, and we want that continuity, and we want to make sure all those military units understand that, and we put the onus on South Carolina National Guard to facilitate and overlook that.
So it's open to any military unit across the Army complex?
Even bigger than the Army. We've had everything. I think we've even had Coast Guard folks here. So we've had so we've had some Bernie type units come and do trainings at the National Lab. We've had them actually go into different facilities here at Savannah River Site. We've had Marines. You saw the picture of the Marines down in the pump house. We've had them all here at Savannah River Site. So South Carolina National Guard just facilitates and coordinates or helps us coordinate the training, and then we oversee them. So think of them as a contractor to us.
Thank you for that clarification. That is extraordinarily helpful. My other question is, has the Department of Energy or SRNL possibly identified and compiled a list of tasty carrots to get some of these people here? And by tasty carrots, I mean projects.
Yeah, so after we did the first 2 years of projects, I think it's funny that, never mind. There was actually, SRS put together a list of projects and scopes of work, complete with the pictures and stuff, so that the military can go out and sell different projects and stuff to units. So that does exist. It's constantly evolving as, there's different needs and things like that. But we do have some projects on the shelf that are ready to go as far as like if the military wanted to come in and do these trainings.
So you provide the information to the military, and then it's whose job to go sell it?
Well, so it's a process, right? I don't want to say selling it, but what has happened to date, and I don't know if this is the right thing, but it's kind of very communication, word of mouth type. So Tommy Striblin, our state employee or the South Carolina National Guard state employee that's at Savannah River Site, he'll have different units that just based off of word of mouth type of advertising, if you will, that they know that they have the ability to come to Savannah River Site and do different training events. And you'll have a unit commander, engineering commander, that I want to build these widgets. Is there anything going on at Savannah River Site? Tommy will, yes, no, and then he'll bring them to Savannah River Site, and we'll actually do like little window tours where we'll have some of the folks there kind of walking down, and so they can see this area. And that's just generally how the process has kind of gone. And if they're interested, we'll start moving down a road.
I see. And how might we better help you?
So the recommendation, this is my immediate goal is really, ideally, we get a recommendation from the CAB that says, this is great, or however you guys want to phrase it. And that's going to help us get some of these higher level documents signed, sealed, which will allow South Carolina National Guard to start, as time goes on, increasing the amount of resources and stuff that we have at Savannah River Site. Oh, okay, sorry. And really, it's a long game. It takes a long time for this stuff to happen. And just there's been a lot of progress in the past few years with just them getting the land land permit, land license. But that's kind of the road.
Okay, and one more. Refresh my memory. What is this program called? Is it in my slide?
The program?
Yeah, to do the Army stuff. Military training update. No, that's not it. Like, what is this portion of what you do called?
I just call it the military.
Oh, just the military training?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know
we're not that
for
formal
it.
on this yet.
No acronym?
I need a job title. No.
I might give you
Program
one,
Director
Zach.
for Military Activities at Savannah River Site.
Okay. Thank you. That's it.
Of course.
Yeah, Carl Steen, CAB. What do you have existing in the way of landing strips or heliports or whatever?
Yeah, so I don't know if I'll have a good. So there's been different discussions and stuff, and I want to stress discussions. There's nothing been as far as landing strips for fixed-wing aircraft, but we have different HLZs, helicopter landing zones, throughout the site. A lot of these Centera have already designated for emergency whatnot, but there's already dozens and dozens designated around the site. The military does piggyback a lot off those type HLZs, and so they're scattered throughout the entire area. And I'm trying to remember, I don't think I have a big blow up a D area, but for instance, they're sometimes they're pretty tight. So there's actually on paper an HLZ right in here, and then there's an HLZ right over here for the pump house, where they're putting in helicopters. And wrong way, the arrows are getting to me. Yep. So there's HLZs right over here and then they're scattered throughout intersections. They can put down these aircrafts just about anywhere. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
In between the poles.
Yeah.
All right. Dan?
Dan Kaminsky, CAB. Thank you for the update, Zach. No question about your presentation, but a little birdie had told me this may be your last CAB meeting. And
No, so I believe I told everyone, but Kim Rapp back there, raise your hand, Kim. She's going to be taking over for the Strategic and Legacy Management point of contact, so upgrade for y'all, yay. Yeah, but I'm still going to be involved in the CAB. There's a lot of different functions and stuff that I do. I work with Kim every day, and just like with the Strategic and Legacy Committee, there's different topics of the conversation that I'll be a part of. So unluckily for y'all, that's not the last you're going to see me, but you'll get to see more of Kim, so that is a small victory for y'all.
Doug?
Doug Howard, Cap. Zach, as we know, Fort Bragg is right up the road, 82nd Airborne Special Operations. They do a lot of force entry training there.
That's right.
How would they know about this area being possibly open for that type training here? Would they go through, would it be your National Guard folks that would have to let them know about that, or how would that work?
Yeah, so you just kind of highlighted on the struggle right there. So the importance of getting all these different documents and stuff, like put together, signed, sealed, delivered, and getting some of these criteria check marked, sort of say. There's this program, and it's really like a land management type tool that the military uses, RIFMIS, if you're familiar. But don't ask me what the acronym stands for, but it's in the military. You can go, we'll just say online on a computer, you can check, hey, I need to find a machine gun range, and you can search and find said machine gun range and then reserve it in a nutshell. And getting Savannah River Site into that system would be a large step in that direction, where different military units, without the word-of-mouth advertising, without knowing somebody, will be able to search through different training. If they have a different training requirement, they can be able to search that and find that in that system.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Free at last? No? One more? Thomas? Yes, sir.
I don't have a question, but there are a couple of things that I want to make sure we get covered before we leave this topic. Good job, Zach. Thank you. Now, on the slides, there were several slides there that showed South Carolina National Guard land at Savannah River. And sometime, as time passes, what was said in one of the meetings get lost versus what's on a piece of paper. And one of the things that was said was that we have lease agreements, or would have lease agreements and things in place. So I want to make sure that is absolutely clear, and maybe we'll make some adjustments to the slides as well. There is no South Carolina National Guard land at Savannah River. There will be no South Carolina National Guard land at Savannah River. It will remain under federal control. Any land that they utilize on the site will be done via lease agreement. I know that was said in here, but we need to make sure on the slides, because as time passes, what was actually said in the room gets lost, but what's on the piece of paper sticks around a pretty long time. Doug, you'd made mention of collaboration with Fort Gordon, that we're doing a lot of other things with Fort Gordon, particularly in the cybersecurity arena. And so we've provided access to the site to them numerous times so they'd be able to see what's physically available there. But up to this point, they've chosen to go more with the cybersecurity line of things, since that's consistent with their primary focus at the site and Signal Corps and things of that sort. No one asked about it, but I want to talk about it a little bit. When Zach mentioned some of the projects and talked about the things that may be available there, one of the things that we have to balance, sometimes being on the federal side, no good deed goes without being punished. And so one of the things that we have to balance is that, when we identify some of the scope that the military may be able to do, there are small businesses out there that are saying, hey, I could have done that for you, Savannah River. So we have to balance a little bit between, okay, what's good for training for the military, what may be good for training for the country versus small business opportunities that could potentially be there as well. There was also a question regarding collaboration between Centera and the National Guard. Thus far, and Zach made mention that we don't do obviously we don't do live fire training there at the site, other than at the gun ranges there. The other issue with it, I think, is that when we're doing some of the force-on-force training, there's special weaponry and things that the Centera uses for their training. And that would may need that if we were to try to do some collaboration with the military, they would have to do something different with their weaponry, because we go through great exercises or great effort to make sure that what's being used during those force-on-force training is different than their normal weaponry. I mean, we'd like to conduct the training, we would like for them to be as realistic as possible, but we want everybody to go home after the training. And then the other thing with some of the things that we're doing with the military there, if the work has a regulatory bent to it, sometimes we have to be concerned also with the timing. In years past, we've planned out some of these things with the National Guard, but because of events that were happening around the world or even around the country, they were not able to come in at the time that we were expecting them to be there, and then we had to go back and kind of realign the work on when it was going to get done, and sometimes that may require additional discussion with the regulators. So we're having to balance some of those things. We're trying to work with them as much as we possibly can. I think that there are lots of good things that we can do with them, but there are other things that we've got to kind of keep in the balance as we work with them. Okay?
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And thank you, Zach. You walked away, but let's make sure to... All right. Last but certainly not least, South Carolina DHEC and Susan Fulmer. If you remember, this is going to be continuation in some ways of the EPA presentation from May. So keep that in mind, the areas that EPA was responsible for, as you listen to Susan talk about South Carolina DHEC's responsibilities. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. As James said, I'm Susan Fulmer. I'm the Federal Facility Agreement Project Manager. If you're not sure what the Federal Facility Agreement is, don't worry, I'll get to that. As he mentioned, John Richards gave a presentation to you in May. He is my EPA counterpart. He's the Federal Facility Agreement Project Manager for EPA. And Brian Hennessy at DOE is the FFA Manager. So aside for doing the FFA, the section that I manage at DHEC is the Federal Remediation section. And so that group handles all of the federal lead Superfund sites in the state. So that includes all of our national priority list or NPL sites. And as a reminder, SRS is one of those NPL sites. Today I want to give you an overview of what we do at DHEC, specifically as it relates to oversight at SRS. First of all, our mission at DHEC is to see healthy people living in healthy communities. And our vision and our mission is to improve the quality of life for all South Carolinians by protecting and promoting the health of the public and the environment. Okay, so we do this through our four divisions at DHEC. Now, DHEC is unique because we are one of a few state agencies in the nation that combines their health departments and their environmental departments into one agency. And the integration of our health and environmental sides allows us to work towards our vision of healthy people and healthy communities. So we do that by these four divisions: health regulations, public health, environmental affairs, and our operations division. I'm going to focus on environmental affairs and its role and oversight at SRS, but because DHEC touches the lives of so many South Carolina citizens, I did just want to mention briefly what health regulations and public health do. Our health regulations group, you may know them because they oversee licensing and certification of healthcare facilities, EMS providers, and drug control enforcement. And our public health group operates the agency's public health and state laboratory functions, and so that includes the 72 local health departments that you might be familiar with. All right, so what does environmental affairs do? Well, I like to think of environmental affairs a little bit like the Lorax, but instead of speaking for the trees, we speak for the air, water, and land. And we do that through our environmental affairs bureaus: Bureau of Air, Bureau of Water, Land and Waste Management, Environmental Health Services, and our Office of Ocean and Coastal Resource Management, or OCRM. With the exception of OCRM, all of those bureaus have a role in oversight at SRS. Okay, so what do the environmental affairs programs that oversee SRS do? Well, we're focused on protection, oversight, emergency preparedness, and improvement. And I'm going to walk you through each of those areas and tell you a little bit about how we do that in our various program areas. That shot here is us at the Saltstone facility. This is, we've got folks from Land and Waste and Bureau of Water, and meeting with some familiar faces here. There's Jim. You might remember that day. So we make frequent site visits out there. All right, but before I get into the specifics of what we do regulate, I want to remind everybody that we do not regulate the storage of spent nuclear fuel and nuclear materials. Okay, so DHEC promotes protection of human health and the environment through enforcement of federal and state laws and regulations. EPA has delegated implementation to the state for programs in air, water, waste, and cleanup. DHEC issues permits in accordance with federal and state requirements to SRS. We inspect SRS for compliance with those permits, and then we'll take enforcement action if and when it's necessary. These are some of the protection programs that are covered in our environmental affairs division. Over here are some of the Bureau of Water programs that you might be familiar with. I mentioned yesterday in my update in underground injection control, one of those programs. They provide permits so that SRS can inject into the groundwater as part of cleanup activities. We've got air programs right here, RCRA, Hazardous Waste, Resource Conservation Recovery Act, radioactive waste transportation, solid waste, and underground storage tanks. Those are all Bureau of Land and Waste Management programs. And I do want to just mention right here, these underground storage tanks that are regulated are not the same thing as the high-level waste tanks. Okay, these are different. These are like gas station tanks, things you would store petroleum in, okay? So that's different. We'll get to the high-level waste tanks, but that's handled in our Bureau of Water programs. And lab certification, that's one of our Bureau of Environmental Health Services programs. All right, in our oversight role, we do several things. First of all, the programs that I mentioned on the previous slide, they all have staff that go and monitor SRS to ensure compliance with permits, so they have a role in oversight. And then there's our Environmental Surveillance and Oversight Program, or ESOP, and Grace Ann gave you a great presentation earlier this year on the ESOP program, so I won't go into a whole lot of detail on it, but I do want to remind you of what that program is. DHEC does monitor SRS in the surrounding areas to determine what impact there may be from Savannah River Site's activities. And so they do that through monitoring and taking samples of air, water, soil, sediment, game animals, vegetation, milk, and fish. The information that's gathered from that data collection is put together in an annual report. This annual report here was the 2017 data report, and that was the one that was released earlier this year. So as a reminder, that schedule for submitting or publishing the reports is on a 2-year delay. So that allows us time to collect the data, to review the data, analyze it, and put that report together. If you haven't seen this report yet, it is available on our website. You can access it at the address at the bottom of the screen. And if you have questions on that report, please feel free to see Grace Ann or me, and we'll make sure we get those questions answered for you. So there's a large presence at the site by our ESOP program, and they're located in our Aiken Regional Office. And they also have staff in that office that maintains a frequent visit or a frequent schedule of oversight at the site for either compliance activities or just checking in on the work that's being done under the federal facility agreement or the RCRA permit to clean up the site. Another facet that DHEC covers is emergency preparedness. South Carolina in general has a comprehensive emergency operations plan for disasters, whether they are natural or man-made disasters. But we do take some extra precautions when it comes to SRS. We have an emergency response team that holds practice drills geared towards SRS, and they also hold quarterly meetings to keep updated. All right, now I want to talk about some areas of improvement or cleanup that DHEC oversees at the site. SRS has a hazardous waste permit that is under the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, or RCRA. That permit requires the assessment and cleanup of all waste contaminated areas at SRS, and it covers some of the major plumes and areas at SRS. So F, H, M, and the Mixed Waste Management Facility all fall under that RCRA permit. The picture here on this slide is from the F area base injection system. That is at the F area groundwater operable unit. And this was taken on one of our recent 5-year remedy review site visits. And DHEC, EPA, and DOE all participated in that walk down just to check the status of these systems and make sure they were operating in accordance with the remedy. Another area that we do cleanup oversight in at DHEC is through our Superfund or CERCLA program. CERCLA is our Comprehensive Environmental Response and Compensation and Liability Act. EPA is the authority for CERCLA. DHEC is the authority for the RCRA permit. So the Federal Facility Agreement, which I mentioned earlier and promised I would get to, is a document that marries the process by which DHEC and EPA and DOE conduct cleanup under the RCRA and CERCLA cleanup processes. The FFA is going to ensure that activities satisfy both the RCRA permit and the CERCLA process. So our documents have these very long titles because they cover both the RECRA acronym and the CERCLA acronym. In this picture here, this was one of our FFA units that was recently completed. This was the D Area Ash Project, and this was from a walk down that the three parties conducted towards the end of last year to ensure that that remedy was completed in accordance with the plans that they DOE had proposed. Okay, so some differences between the RECRA permit and the FFA. The RECRA permit is a defined regulatory mechanism. The FFA is an agreement. FFA is required by CERCLA, the CERCLA Act. It requires that federal facilities have an FFA, but those FFAs would vary from facility to facility. So under RECRA, a permit violation would be handled through an enforcement process. In the FFA, if there's a disagreement, we would handle it through a dispute resolution process. Luckily for us, we don't have a lot of disputes at SRS. The regulators work very well together through our FFA agreement and our core team process, and so we don't find ourselves in that world too often. If we have to go there, we certainly will. But as I mentioned, the federal facility agreement works very well. We have a very well-established core team. We use a formal and consensus-based approach to our decision-making. Each of the agencies has a designated lead or a core team lead for the projects, and so that person is the voice for the decision-making process. So we have to have the right people at the table, but we'll also have support, technical support staff, and stakeholders do have a role in those decision-making processes as well. The other thing the FFA does for us is it provides the schedule for when we're going to work on certain units. So if you look in Appendix E, you'll see the current fiscal year, the next fiscal year, what the milestones are that are proposed for undertaking certain actions at those units for cleanup. And then there's the larger schedule in Appendix E3, which goes through all of the units and the work in out years. All right. Another area of cleanup at DHEC is governed by our site treatment plan. The site treatment plan was enabled by the Federal Facility Compliance Act in 1992, and that required DOE to devise a plan for developing treatment capacities and technologies to treat mixed waste by an approved schedule and enforced by a consent order. The plan was approved in consultation with EPA and with input from other states that might be affected by the plan. This consent order was issued back in 1998. It has been amended a couple of times, 2002, 2003. And it covers mixed low-level waste, transuranic, and high-level waste. The plan was last updated in 2011, and then at that point they made a decision to go to updates on a 5-year schedule, so it was last updated in 2016. So this requires state approval for any HAZ or RAZ waste shipment to SRS. Okay, now let's talk about high-level waste and how the state oversees this work. Okay, Section 3116 of the 2005 National Defense Authorization Act allows for the Energy Secretary to determine in consultation with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that certain radioactive waste resulting from processing of spent nuclear fuels is not high-level waste, but residuals that remain must be under a state-approved or state-issued permit. So at DHEC, we regulate the high-level waste tanks under a state wastewater program, under a state wastewater permit. And closure would be conducted under a wastewater closure plan. The general closure plan for each tank farm outlines maintenance and monitoring activities that will be performed. DHEC would approve activities associated with waste removal, stabilization, and operational closure. There are tank-specific modules, and those describe the operational closure of activities of certain tanks. Those modules are generated as the tanks are prepared for closure. DHEC is the lead for the tanks up to the proposed plan and record of decision point in time. Those are both CERCLA documents. Once EPA would look at documents as well and provide comments to the state can incorporate those comments that they then provide to DOE. Once a tank is closed out and exits the permit, the wastewater permit, then it becomes addressed through the federal facility agreement process. Okay, so DHEC is committed to its vision of healthy people and healthy communities, and we do that at SRS through maintaining permits and compliance inspections, the cleanup activities that DHEC oversees, the emergency preparedness training and response that we maintain, and then the oversight activities like the ESOP program. In the future, we'll continue to focus on high-level waste treatment and tank closures. We're looking forward to the startup of the salt waste processing facility to move that work forward. We're going to continue our role in site cleanup through our RECRA and CERCLA cleanup programs, and we'll continue to focus on legacy waste disposition. If you have additional things that you want to find out about DHEC, especially on the health side of the agency or the environmental side, you can check out our website. We've been doing some updates to it lately, trying to make it improved and make it a little bit more user-friendly. So if you can't find something you're looking for, please let me know, and we'll make sure that we get it updated so that it's the information is available to you. You can follow us on social media and find out what the latest happenings are. You can follow things like ozone alert action days, which we've been having some of those, especially in the summertime. The hepatitis outbreak that has been happening in Aiken, that's information about that is available online and through the social media outlets. If you're looking for a meaningful career, you can go to our LinkedIn page and check that out as well. And I do want to, before I take questions, I just want to acknowledge all of the DHEC folks that are here in supporting the cab. So y'all stand up. There they are. As I mentioned, Grace Ann handles ESOP. We've got Barbara and Greg from our Aiken office. And then Sandra is our risk assessor through the FFA program. So they're always at the CAB meetings and happy to help you and want to make sure that we're hearing what your concerns are so that we can help address them from the state perspective.
Always well represented. Dave, let's start with you.
Dave Isley, CAB, thank you so much for that briefing. In light of the briefing we heard earlier this afternoon, does that affect any of your activities and relationship with the site, the redefinition of the high-level waste?
So DHEC is looking at the interpretation of the definition. We haven't made any formal opinion on that yet. I don't want to speak for the agency because it's not just the agency making an opinion. It's also the governor's office has an opinion on that as well. But we're certainly looking at it, and we've had discussions with DOE about, if we have questions, we do feel very comfortable calling them up and asking them, well, exactly what does this mean? What are you looking at? So we do have those talks.
So as they say around here, you have a dog in that race.
We do.
AK, I think your card was up second.
AK Hassan, CAB. Enjoyed your presentation. Under the improvement legacy waste, you indicated that that process allowed for input from other states. And I was just wondering, being a Georgian, is there's an ongoing communication between your agency and those agencies in Georgia that have similar interests?
For that site treatment plan, that was dealt with in the 90s, so I can't speak to exactly how that information was communicated. But, we do know regulators in Georgia. We keep in touch, of course, with EPA as well, who is located in Atlanta. So we do take, any comments into consideration, but any comments that we have specifically would be the state's comments, and Georgia residents could comment on anything that they wanted to, and that could be considered.
I guess what I was getting at is that I know that from the information you provided today and previously, that your agency does a lot of testing, et cetera, on the site and whatnot. And I'm just wondering if there's some shared. Do you share that information with Georgia, or does Georgia do certain testing and share with you?
I don't know that Georgia does any testing. Our information is available on the website. So Georgia, whether it be the regulators or the public in Georgia, can certainly access that information. I don't know, Grace Ann or Greg, you might know if that information is given to Georgia regulators to look at. Okay.
And Dan.
Dan Kaminsky, CAB. Susan, great presentation. Thank you for the in-depth discussion and presentation of what you actually do out there. We've sort of pieced it I've pieced it together over the years, but new CAB members who haven't been around a while, I think it's a great summary to present to us once every other year or so as new members come on board, or maybe it can be part of the new member packet. I did have one question, and this is kind of what I see the most of DHEC personally is on the public health side. Anytime I go out to eat, I'm looking for that A rating.
I'm looking too.
So as we all should, and I have walked away from B-rated restaurants because I know you have to screw up pretty badly to have a B. But does the Department of the Environmental Affairs area of DHEC also issue grades to SRS, its subcontractors, or businesses in general?
No, our environmental side actually does the food inspections, right? Isn't
they do?
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
And so we do have a role in that. I guess we probably have visited the cafeteria at SRS and issued a letter. But as far as businesses, I think they mentioned at the update yesterday that there was an award that was through our solid waste program for, you might need to help me here, was it recycling or green businesses? So that was issued, but in general, we don't, that type of award we might do.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions from around the table? Well, I want to thank you for changing your slide format so that it has a lot more white space on it. I've really saved me on toner because we have been going through blue every time we print y'all's for the year, so this has been awesome. So thank you very much. Okay. I appreciate it. All right, folks. So that's it for presentations today. Before we move on to voting and closing those recommendations, if that's the direction that you head, we need to take care of a little bit of housekeeping first, and that'll be our public comment period. I went and checked the sign-up sheet a little bit ago, and I only saw one name signed up. Rick, you ready? Let's do it, sir.
So I'm Rick McLeod with SRS Community Reuse Organization. James said I have to go to 4:45. Is that correct?
I assure you that that's not accurate.
Oh, okay. I just was thinking that was okay. We're a nonprofit, private nonprofit, so I'm not speaking for DOE, NNSA, or any of the SRS contractors. So we're totally free to say what we want to say during the public comment period. So I'm going to go a little bit more than what Mark Sinderling did. But one thing he did say, if you remember at the very beginning, he commended, and I want to commend DOE for taking on this high-level waste interpretation. I don't think a lot of y'all understand this is probably the biggest policy change that DOE has undertaken since they looked at the waste incidental reprocessing. So this is a huge effort. The CAB, some of you all are new, but the CAB actually did a recommendation on this last year or a year and a half ago in favor of looking at the high-level waste, and there was a number of reasons y'all had the recommendation. I also want to give an attaboy to Mark. I was hoping he'd stick around. I guess he went back to D.C., but he and his staff did an excellent job, and if you haven't read it, you need to read the Federal Register. I know it's 12 pages. If you've got a little nuclear nerd in you, it's a good read. They did an excellent job. Some of it is legalese, I'll give them that, but it actually explains why they did what they did. It would have helped a whole lot if they did that at the beginning, but all they did was say, we're going to do this interpretation. Then they come out with why they did it. I mentioned the Energy Community Alliance, the report they have. Well, they estimated a cost savings because I asked Mark at a webinar last week this question. He kind of gave you the same answer that some of y'all asked. But the ECA document says this could be a 40 billion with a B cost savings across the complex. Okay, so y'all were asking that number. Mark cannot say that. That's not an official number. That's a number that's in that report. It's a number they testified to the Hill on potential cost savings. Now, that might have included Hanford's waste being in there. If they come out, that number could decrease. I don't care if it's 10 billion with a B. It's a lot of money that this interpretation could help change. One of those locally, y'all have been giving presentations before on the double stacking of the canisters, the high-level waste canisters where they double stack. So they did that to prevent building glass waste storage building number 3. So we got 1 and 2. One's about full, 2 is filling up. We started double stacking. Not all of the double stacking can continue. So we're looking at 3-4 years, whatever period, of looking at another glass waste storage building. I believe the last one 15, 20 years ago, Jim, was $100 million. So you can imagine what the cost is today. So you're looking at potential local cost savings. This type of effort, if we could ever get to the actual canisters being classified, there are roughly 2,300 canisters from information we have that could be potentially low-level or non-high-level waste that could be moved out of the state. So I just want to make the comments. First was that Mark and them should be commended. This is not a light lift. As he said, it's a heavy lift and a very good policy change. I hope y'all stay tuned to the EA and y'all follow it very closely on this first step, the baby step, as Mark said it, towards looking at the wastewater. So hopefully we can continue that towards other waste streams. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. Are there any other comments from the public? Going once, going twice. Sold. Okay, so now we're up to voting. And Joyce is sitting up because she knows that the 2 recommendations up for closure today are out of FDSR. Do you or someone from your committee want to cover the response or talk about it a little bit before we move into voting?
Is it going to go up there?
You want to come up here?
No, I said, is it going to go up there? Do I have to look it
the
up?
response?
Yeah.
We can. Do you need it?
I mean, do I have a paper with it?
No. I assumed that everybody had read the response when it came out.
Yeah, I mean, we all read it.
Okay, well, do you want to? Okay, that's fine. I mean, if you want to talk to it at all, I was just asking. Nope, you're good? Okay. Would you like to make a motion then? I'm prompting Doug to ask for a motion. Will you ask for a motion?
We have a motion.
We have a motion. I move to close. Do I do them one at a time? Or can I do both of them?
We can do them both together if you'd like.
I move to close 359 and 361. Recommendations 359 and 361.
Is there a second? Yes, sir. Okay, Narendra, he seconds.
Is there any discussion? All right. So we're going to do the voting one at a time, just so that I've got it on the record, if we would please. And because we also built the slides that way. So for our own sanity, if you would, let's vote on 359 first. The 1 green button is yay. Yay and abstain show up down there. We have 10 responses. We should end up with 18. If you remember, your clicker is up under your nameplate if you haven't voted already. 14, 15. Just a few more. Should be 18 folks. If your clicker is not displaying, please let me know. You should be displaying your response. Yours is not. Did your battery die? How about this? Will you steal Gil's for me?
Yeah.
Anybody else? Your two as well? Let me grab a couple more. That would make 18, yep. Yeah. You ever check the batteries on something and it worked fine until you need it and then the battery doesn't work anymore? Yeah. My fire alarm is often the same way. That's not true. There we go, guys. Did I give you another bum one? Use that one instead. It's like it's trying to find the receiver. That's weird. There it went. All right, so let's close the voting on this one. Everybody agreed. Yay. All right, let's move on to the next one. And again, if you will press yay, nay, or abstain as it may pertain to your vote. There it went. Thank God. All right. Close the vote. And 100% again. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Does anybody have any closing remarks? As I stare longingly at Doug.
Yeah, I would just like to thank once again James and your crew for putting on a great show. I'd like to thank all the folks from DOE for coming out and giving us great presentations. And I'd like to thank the facilities here for putting on a nice spread for us. So with that being said, I think we'll meet again at our subcommittee meetings, and also we have the full board meeting in September. So everybody drive safely and enjoy the rest of the summer. Meeting is adjourned.